So hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by again. It is our weekly Wednesday night live stream. For those who are new to the channel, we do these every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. We usually go till about 10:30. We're a bit flexible, sometimes a little bit later, but we're here for at least the next couple hours talking, this week in Canadian and American politics. As you guys can see, Brianna is here. Brianna is here on the camera, and she's also in the chat. She's got that little wrench next to her name. She'll be helping to moderate and discuss the events along with us. We're glad to have her here. She's usually here for the first hour or so, but sometimes when we're having a lot of fun, she'll stick around a little bit longer. So we'll play it by ear. In general, we'll be talking about a few things. I know some people are already leaving comments. Amelia is saying that her cinnamon rolls were going to be ready just in time. I hope you brought enough for everyone, and you can ship them to all of us. We'll practice good social distancing. But Jared also says that he wants to hear more about Trudeau, keep track of what's happening here in Canada. We'll certainly talk about that. In general, what's happening in Canada is that, we've passed this aid package, and in some ways our aid package is better than the American package. And in general, I would say the Canadian handling of the crisis, of the actual epidemic and all of that, has been better, right? Like way less cases per capita. The cases haven't been as serious per capita. All of the provinces have been on board with like the social distancing guidelines, whereas in the States, you have some of your states that are doing just as much as Canada, but then you have others that are basically going around like nothing's happening, which is grossly irresponsible. But Canada's aid package is really bad as it pertains to like representing and taking care of the most vulnerable. So I've noted this before, but the Canadian aid package is basically called the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. And it's there for people who don't qualify for employment insurance, right? So in Canada, if you don't work enough hours in a 12-month period, or you have the sort of job that doesn't pay into EI, like you're a contract worker, or you're a small business person, or you're a freelancer, or you're in an excluded industry, then you don't get access to an employment insurance. And of course, as with the United States, lots of people are finding themselves unemployed right now. And so they created this additional program, but it leaves out so many people that some of the most vulnerable people in Canada are going to be worse off than they would if they had Donald Trump's plan. And a lot of people scoff when I say that, but Trump's plan for somebody that makes $0 a year gives you $1,200 a year. But if you make $0 a year in Canada,
$1,200 a year or a month?
$1,200 payment. But if you make up to $4,999 or less, you get nothing in Canada. Our plan excludes students for the most part. It excludes anyone who makes under $5,000. It excludes anyone that was already unemployed and now they can't find a job because no one's hiring. Like basically no one's hiring, obviously. It excludes people who are freelancers, right? So you're a freelancer, and let's say you write articles, or let's say you're like a bookkeeper, and you haven't lost all your business, but you've lost 90% of it, meaning that you're effectively making nothing. You're making a couple $100 a week, not enough to pay rent or survive or anything. The government gives you nothing. You have to lose all 100% of your income. If your boss at work gives you 1 hour a week of employment, you do not get any aid at all. Because if you quit your job, you can't access aid because you have to be rendered unemployed against your will via the coronavirus and whatnot. I said it. We're probably going to get demonetized for other reasons, but I said it. So on YouTube, if you say the word coronavirus,
you get... say it again.
Yeah,
what if they missed it the first time?
My voice is too eloquent. My pronunciation is too perfect. So in any case, the Canadian package leaves out so many. And the federal government is refusing to do anything to help renters, and they're trying to make it all about, like the constitutional boundaries. But during moments of crises like this, the federal government can, if it wishes, assume greater powers. And so we have this situation in Canada, and frankly, the way I've seen it reported in the United States as well is that Canada's got this great package that like everybody is going to get $2,000 a month for 4 months. But it's like, no, the people who actually need the most help are getting nothing. And it also applies, and a lot of people have brought this up, that in places like Ontario, we have something like the Ontario Disability Support Program, ODSP, and it gives people like starvation amounts of money, less than $1,000 a month. And so the federal government is saying to people who qualify that we are going to give you $2,000 a month because that's what you need to survive. And they're continuing to recognize, them and provincial governments, that the people who have already been poor are surviving on way less than $2,000 a month. People who are getting, in some cases, less than $1,000 a month and expected to live off that. And so that's where we are. Trudeau's package is good for some people who frankly aren't the worst off, and it's leaving the worst off people furthest behind, right? That's where we're at right now with the Canadian package, at least from the federal government. And in a lot of ways, it's been hard to challenge that because our media often ignores the left in Canada even more than Bernie gets ignored, because Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have tried to suggest, hey, give everybody the $2,000 a month. Give it to everyone. We know that's going to cost money, but you can tax it back. And what we've suggested basically is that for the very poorest, we don't care if they're actually working. Give them $2,000. There's nothing ever wrong with giving the poorest and most vulnerable Canadians a little bit more money. But for middle-class people and up who actually don't lose any income, we can tax that full $2,000 back at the next tax year. So if you make under like 40 grand, we don't care. Keep the $2,000. If you're above that, even if you do make a lot of money, but you lost wages because of this, keep the $2,000 a month for 4 months or whatever. That would be quicker and easier because we got to get people money now. And the Trudeau scheme is going to be a means-tested mess. It's going to leave out potentially millions of people. Like another common one, and people don't often think of students as vulnerable. We have this assumption that students live off mommy and daddy, and maybe some students do. But there are a lot of students out there, guys, that are basically adults living on their own. And the way the program works is that you have needed to earn $5,000 in the last 12 months. If you earn any less than that, perverse as it is, the poorest people get no money. But even if you did earn, say, $5,000 in the summer of 2019, you worked really hard, you earned as much money as you could, you worked 2 jobs, and now you don't work during the school year because you want to focus on your studies, and it comes time to get a summer job this summer. There's no summer jobs, right? And a lot of student summer jobs are like outdoor jobs that have been that are affected by this. And so you go to get a summer job this summer, there's none. And then you go to apply for this benefit and they say no, because you needed to have been made unemployed by this. Being unable to get a job because of the crisis isn't sufficient enough. So it's a totally broken program. And I'm not suggesting that on the whole, the American plan is better than the Canadian plan. But what I will say is that for the very, very poorest people, even the Trump-endorsed plan gives them something. Canada gives them nothing. And it's shameful. It's shameful. And it's shameful that people have just bought into it. And it's sad. And I'm not blaming Ilhan Omar, but even Ilhan Omar was talking about how the Canadian plan was great because the media in Canada does such a crappy job at actually interrogating our own politicians. And so that's the Canadian thing. About Bernie and The View, David Dole did a really good video on it, but I want to talk a bit about how Bernie continues to go into sources, into venues, onto TV networks and TV shows that clearly hate him because he realizes that's what a leader does. And we can also talk about Biden. Even on MSNBC, which will give him softball after softball, he can't, do an interview without notes, nor can he do it without sounding like a man with clear cognitive decline, clear cognitive health issues, clear dementia, whatever you want to call it. And of course, we can continue to talk about Tara Reade. We're not ignoring that story on this channel. Just because CNN and MSNBC and all the supposed, feminists that stand for women's justice have ignored that story doesn't mean we will. So we could take questions about Tara Reade and how that story's unfolding with regard to Joe Biden. And of course, whatever other questions you guys have, happy to field them, whether it's about the Canadian aid package or Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders or what have you.
Did you not get enough sleep last night? Because you're awfully grumpy today.
I'm not that grumpy.
Okay, can you change the screen so I can see?
Yes, for sure. So we got some super chats. One thing we like to do on this channel is, as much as we can, we like to read comments from everybody. But of course, people who are very supportive with their super chats or becoming a channel member, we try to make sure we give those questions specific attention.
Okay, so the first one is from Karen Sita. So thank you so much. They say use another word like Clementine, ? That's a good suggestion.
Karen, I was going to call you Clementine. We have we know somebody with that name, but the reality is that I'm actually pretty good. During most of my videos, if you guys have noted this, I'm actually going to quickly just do a check here while I'm answering this. One thing I've noticed is that if you don't use the word, you can sort of use innuendo for it. Some channels have been really irresponsible and have been using words like the flu to see, we've already been demonetized. It is what it is. But I don't like that, because a lot of people are saying don't compare it to any other illness like that, because this is far more serious, it's far more contagious, and the people who get it are at far more risk. So I don't want to do that. So what I just say is the current health crisis, the global health crisis, the global...
Maybe stop saying it because you've just applied for a review.
Yeah, whatever. Okay. It's fine. It's fine.
Next one.
They won't get reviewed till tomorrow.
Yeah. Aspie for Peace says, would you like Canada or Ontario to lock down?
Yeah. So, I would say in general, we've done a pretty good job. I wish we would have gone faster with some of the things, and that's just not like Ontario or Canada-wide specific. I think all of the provinces, we could have closed schools a bit faster. Maybe they could have closed the U.S. I know they should have closed the U.S. border faster. They shouldn't have waited to make Donald Trump's feelings less hurt so they could close the border together. We should have closed that border at least a few days before we did. And in general, I think most of what's remaining open is pretty reasonable. In terms of like a full lockdown, I don't know. That's tricky, right? Because you can't physically confine everyone to their home, and it would be tricky because as long as, say, gas stations, grocery stores...
Well, I don't think that's what they mean by a lockdown.
Yeah.
I think they mean close non-essential services faster.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've done a pretty good job. I think that what remains is that people need to stay home more. I mean, like most businesses, a lot of them have closed. I do think there are some construction projects are still going on, even though they're non-essential. And I know a lot of the workers have expressed concern. So I would say more needs to be done. But frankly, I think the biggest issue in Canada right now, at least, is people not listening to the lockdown orders.
Well, probably in the U.S.
Yeah, and in the U.S. as well. Although in some of the U.S. states, the state officials haven't done their job. I know Florida just put out a statewide thing earlier today, but there was a picture from last week of the Florida coast. This beautiful beach, right? And the beach in the foreground of the photo was completely empty, and halfway up the photo, on the beach, it was packed because one county basically closed the beaches and the other one didn't because there was no statewide regulation. And it showed just how ineffective, this sort of quarantine can be unless everyone is on board, especially within a country, because you don't build borders between states or counties. Those don't exist. You need all 50 states to be on board. So in my view, we could do more, but it's hard to see how much more could be done right away. I think, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, a second super chat from Ask Me for Peace says ODSP $100 discretionary funds extra GST next week. So I guess they did get something.
Yeah. So I mean, like, look, and that, well, for one thing, the extra GST, that is a fair point. The federal government does give like a basically a sales tax rebate to low income Canadians, and that allows them to, because sales taxes are really good at raising money. They're actually a good tax. But it's an unequitable tax because the poorest pay the same amount as the richest, which is, of course, not how taxes should work. So Canada gives tax rebates to very low income people. And so they've raised that amount for the duration of the crisis, which is good. So that is a benefit going to low income people, even people who don't make very much money. So thanks for that addition. The ODSP one is, not nearly enough. ODSP should be double what it is in good times, let alone in a crisis. But the ODSP, I assume that's provincial. And so like with the United States, individual provinces are giving out individual benefits. Certain provinces are giving better protections for renters, or they're giving wage subsidies in addition to the federal government, or they're giving rent subsidies like the BC government is. So there are different provincial approaches as well.
Okay, we have a shout out from Betty's Mush with a little dancing guy. What does it say?
It's a little pair, and it says fist bump. Is it fist bump?
Oh, that's cute.
Fist bump. Thank you so much, Betty's. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Then we have Arlene Chambers, who says, "Shame to be demonetized for telling the truth."
Yeah, Arlene, this is an issue that like political channels have to go through. There are channels that are especially newsy political channels, because if you're a political channel but you only post one video a week or a couple a month, what you can do is you upload your video to YouTube, but you don't post it. You only upload it in the back end. And then YouTube scans all videos and then will say, usually within a few minutes, and say, this has been demonetized. Usually maybe it's because of profanity, maybe it's because of the content you're covering, whatever. And then it'll give you the opportunity to appeal. Then it will be seen by a human. It could take some time. Most of the time on my videos, my appeals get accepted. Or I make a video on a topic that I know will be demonetized, but I just feel it's so important I have to do it anyway. The problem with my sort of channel, though, is you don't have days to wait. I need to sometimes make a video as soon as I can and get it up within a couple hours of the event happening, because that's when people want to see it. They want to see my opinion like ASAP. So you have to throw it up demonetized. Sometimes I feel it's not censorship. Sometimes I feel it does limit what you can talk about. But with the coronavirus, I'm torn. I understand why YouTube is doing it, because they're worried about not being able to distinguish between, Christo Aivalis does a discussion about
Did
how...
you just say it again?
Yes, yeah. How Christo Aivalis is, talking about the political and social and economic effects of this news story, which happens to be this pandemic, versus somebody who's like, drink Real Lemon juice and pour it in a cup with a sugar cube and you'll be cured of the corona. And they don't want both of those videos they don't want that latter video to be monetized. So they're just mass demonetizing most coronavirus videos. It applies to a lot of hot button issues. I don't think it applies to controversial terms like socialism. I've never had a video demonetized because I say the word socialist or anti-capitalism or things like that. But it applies to certain political issues like, pro-choice versus pro-life. That one is one that's almost certainly going to get demonetized. When you talk about the Tara Reade story, I have to be careful not to use certain words or it'll get demonetized automatically. Even though the video's not, it doesn't have graphic imagery or anything like that. So it's something you have to keep in mind. But I don't necessarily think I'm being targeted because I'm speaking the truth. I don't think so.
That'll be get tomorrow's video. When you think about it overnight, then
Well, I'm just saying.
I think that you are.
Yeah.
Okay. So next one is from Robin Hood. They say I have 2 part-time jobs in healthcare. One of my employers asked me to choose one employer. Do I still qualify for financial aid?
Robinhood, from my understanding, you probably don't. Now, of course, ultimately, I don't know what province you live in. I don't know if there are special aids for healthcare workers. I don't know if you have a collective agreement that gives you some benefits or protections. Brianna knows more about collective agreements than I do, but you might have something like that even as a part-time worker. So do all of that due diligence. But in general, EI is for workers that go fully unemployed in general. And this Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, the CERB, is also for people who lose their full amount of income for at least 14 days and have because of this. So it seems to me like going from 2 jobs to 1 job, even if that 1 job doesn't pay enough for a full-time living, doesn't qualify you for benefits, even though, as I noted, it 100% should. I mean, do your due diligence, and if you're ever in doubt, apply. But I would say that it doesn't, I would say.
In general, your employers cannot dictate what you do in off hours. So I would question the legality of them telling you to choose one employer. If you have a union, I would go to it. If not, I would call the ministry. Because as long as your hours aren't overlapping in terms like you're not double dipping, as in getting paid for the same hours from 2 different jobs, what you do in your off hours is generally, I'm not your union rep, but generally none of your other employers' business. So, I mean, I would look into that.
Yeah, that's something to look into. Maybe, I don't know, is the situation like both you're like it's part-time, but like now they both want you full-time hours? Maybe we don't know. But in general, if you are forced to ultimately pick one, you might not qualify for benefits. But Brianna's right that they might not have the ability to force you to choose, and it would whether you're unionized or not.
Whether they try.
Yeah, they might try, but you have rights too. So explore those rights.
Okay. So Joseph Mangano says, solidarity with striking workers at Amazon, Instacart, Whole Foods, and elsewhere. Oh, what a time to be on strike.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. There's been and also GE. There's been some really great strikes related to a whole bunch of things. A lot of them health and safety, right? Where there was a real sense that workers in places like Amazon weren't being given adequate health and safety conditions. This was actually an issue before the current pandemic, those jobs not being healthy and safe. But a lot of wildcat strikes happening because workers at these non-unionized facilities in some cases are just like, this is not safe. We refuse to work in these unsafe conditions. And they know they have leverage right now because Amazon is probably even more essential for a lot of people than it has been because many, brick and mortar retailers are closed. Yeah. I don't know the details about all of them. I don't know the Instacart is one as much. I know Whole Foods is also related to health and safety. It's also related to hours. And I know with pay, it must especially be an issue with a lot of these jobs because these workers are woefully underpaid. In fact, in Canada, unionized workers at Loblaws, which is one of Canada's biggest grocery chains, effectively won a $2 increase during this crisis, at least. I don't know if they'll lose it at the end, but at least for now, they've got a $2 increase, which, of course, for workers that were only making $13, $14 an hour.
I think they were bargaining.
Yeah. Is a big increase. And I know that GE workers, General Electric workers, actually went on strike less for their own health and safety, but because they were working on non-essential production, and they went on strike to demand their employer shift production to make ventilators. So they withdrew their labor to demand social production, which is like Like, I'm not diminishing the importance of the other strikes because they're striking for their basic human dignity. But the fact that these workers would basically go on strike and say, you know, we want to ensure our work has a direct application in saving as many lives as possible is super inspiring.
Well, also it ensures that they won't be laid off.
I mean, yeah, there's that too. Brianna, don't be so cynical.
I'm just saying,
yeah, I mean,
from an operations perspective.
Yeah, I think though that like this was primarily driven by like a social responsibility, and it was great to see. So solidarity with all workers going on strike, solidarity with all people who are trying to be forced back into unsafe work conditions by your employer. As much as you can, don't do work that you don't have to do that is unsafe. I know that's not always possible for everyone, but do your best to take care of yourself and everyone around you.
Okay, so next one is from Jason Fu. It says, Christo, love your channel. I wait for you every day and enjoy it. Keep it up, please. What do you think would happen if Biden dropped dead or something like that? I think the probability is high before November.
Well, Jason, thanks for the question and for your support and the kind words. I mean, in my general understanding is that his delegates are, I think, at least for a first ballot, locked to him. But if he was to drop out or pass away or whatever, or because of the Tara Reade thing, get removed from the contest or what have you, then it looks to me like on the first ballot, a lot of his voters would just not vote. And that would make it difficult for Bernie Sanders or anyone else to win on the first ballot. And then what would happen on a second ballot would be that everyone's delegates would technically be freed up. And so all of Biden's delegates plus all the delegates from Warren and Buttigieg and Michael Bloomberg and all the rest could sort of be released and they could vote for whoever they wanted. At that point, the Democrats could nominate somebody else. This is where like the Andrew Cuomo fantasy is coming from. That say Joe Biden will run until the convention, and then at the convention, Biden will be convinced to drop out, and then on the second ballot, he would move his delegates to Andrew Cuomo. When you add in the superdelegates and all the other neoliberal candidate delegates, he would win the nomination. Now, there is the potential that if Joe Biden, say, does drop out tomorrow or pass away or what have you, the neoliberals could try that strategy, but the voters might reject it, and the voters in the subsequent primaries might shift their support to Bernie Sanders. And if that was to happen and Bernie got an outright majority, then there would be nothing to stop him. They couldn't unite everyone to stop him. But that looks unlikely right now because it's going to be hard enough for Bernie to catch Biden, which I think he can do, but Bernie catching Biden will likely leave him short of a majority. So the intent, I think, would be to try to find some neoliberal to replace Joe Biden.
Okay. Ben Riley. Ben Riley says, I'm a programmer. The algorithm, one, could work in a better way pretty easily, and two, is purely for monetary and marketing reasons. Also studied social psych. First, Metal Gear Solid 2 was right.
Yeah.
That must be a video game.
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid, yeah. So Ben makes a great point, and thank you for the donation, Ben. I really appreciate that. Now, the reason YouTube has this algorithm is as a concession to big companies. So what happened a bunch of years ago is that most videos on YouTube, unless they were really, really bad, were monetized, right? Like, there wasn't as a strict a demonetization policy. And then a few people like Logan Paul and Jake Paul and other people ruined it for everybody by posting ridiculous content. And big companies basically said, hey, we don't want, to be showing Coca-Cola ads on a guy who's making jokes about the forest in Japan where people take their own lives, right? And it's like this serious thing. And we don't like that, so we're going to pull our ads. And then YouTube was like, oh my God. And that's where the adpocalypse came from. And a lot of YouTubers who were YouTubing at the time saw a sharp decline in their revenues. And so the compromise became that YouTube would have a stricter threshold of what was ad-friendly and what wasn't. And if it was ad unfriendly, companies would have to explicitly say they are willing to show ads on risque videos. So if you see one of my videos, and I'd say, because I'll put a comment that says it's demonetized, you most likely won't get an ad. But if you ever notice, you'll get like the weirdest, like, you know, scummiest, scammiest ads on those demonetized videos, because those are the only companies willing to advertise on those channels, right? Or on those videos. And that was the compromise made. So it's tricky because YouTube only makes money off the videos on ads. What?
I think we need to.
Yeah.
We get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
When they're demonetized, right? So, or when they're monetized. So I think it is a concession to big companies. But it takes some time for them to clear the queue.
Okay. Next one from Robin Hood. They say, I live in Ontario. One employer is a long-term care facility. They want to keep the residents safe. Does that make a difference? So in Ontario, collective agreements for frontline providers in healthcare have been suspended for the next 2 weeks in order to get around things like hiring provisions and probably some overtime. I don't know, Robin Hood, it sounds like you're in a tricky position, and I would hate to give you wrong advice. I would reach out to the union, or I would call the ministry. I very much doubt that your one employer could force you to quit your other position, though it may require you, in order to keep your position within that long-term care facility, to increase your hours.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and like as Brianna notes, like because of the emergency situation, like employers have been given increased leeway. So in both union and non-union, there might be temporary exceptions. So do your due diligence. But yeah, like check all your options. Like as Brianna says, we can't speak too specifically given the crisis.
Ben Riley, again, voting machines are a pretty easy hack.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, right? Whether, like, I would agree, but even if they're not, so many of them they lack so much transparency that I can see really why, even if they were safe, people wouldn't trust them. Especially ones that don't involve a paper ballot coming in and that same ballot coming out. Even a paper receipt isn't enough, because the vote could still be changed. A person could hit candidate A, the machine switches it to candidate B, and then prints out candidate B on a receipt. You need to have an actual ballot go into a counting machine and come out the other side so that you can cross-reference them. Yeah.
Just to be clear, I did not mean the Ministry of Magic. I meant the Ministry of Labor.
Yeah, and maybe even the Ministry of Health, looking on their website. I know it's like this is primarily labor, but if it's labor code, like...
No, don't bother.
No?
Ministry of Labor.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so our first non-super chat question... Oh, no, we got another super chat. Ben Riley, the Humanist Report says democracies like ours in the States don't always last. Is America Rome now, or France 1789? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. France 17... I mean...
We're not France 1789.
No, I mean... Yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, a lot of countries don't last that long, right? I mean, or they do, but they last in very different political formations. Like England, as it exists, is about 1,000 years old, but it's had revolutions, it's had times of monarchy, it's had times of the protectorate. There have been times of greater central power and weaker central power. And, you know, whether it's like France has been kingdom, empire, series of dukes and duchies, and then there, you know, it was run under Napoleon, and then a republic, and then back to Napoleon again, and then back to his grandson. So, like, countries rarely stay super stable for a super long time. And I think that, like, I won't predict the fall of democracy in any particular country necessarily. Not Canada or the US, at least yet. I don't see that happening in the immediate term. You know, places like Hungary with Viktor Orbán, maybe. We can have that discussion, right, about how he's seizing powers. And that might be the end of democracy in places like Hungary. But I haven't seen such actions yet in Canada or the United States or in most of the EU countries, Western European countries. Now, the bigger question with the US, as it has been, is, what's going to happen in a world where the U.S. is not the only superpower and may not even be in, say, 20 or 30 years, even tied with another country for the superpower. What does a multipolar world look like again? We haven't had such a thing since the Cold War, right? And I think that's a bigger question. And is the U.S. in a decline? When we think of Rome, Rome lasted for 1,000 years after a lot of people think Rome fell. It just moved to the east, right? So, I mean, it's hard to say what a post-global juggernaut U.S. would look like, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to, be utter collapse and fragmentation either,
Okay. All right. So first question, not super chat.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was a whole bunch of great super chats there, guys. Thank you so much for those great questions and comments.
Okay, from Alexander Watt. Do political parties in Canada have primary elections, and how would one access them?
In general, we don't have the same broad level of primaries. Not every party is the same. So how it works for most parties when you select a leader for the party is that every member of the party gets a vote. Some parties still use a convention system where you, like local ridings get delegates and they send their delegates. But most political parties, including, I believe, all the major federal parties, have a one-member, one-vote system. So you'd say you want to run for the party, you have to sign up a certain amount of members and raise a certain amount of money. And then every person in the party gets one person, one vote. You vote on one day, and then you find out who the leader is. There's no stage system. Some parties will weigh ridings to balance out the fact that they have a lot of members in one part of the country, but not a lot in the other. Some parties do that. The Conservatives, for instance, do that federally, so that all their voters in Alberta won't necessarily drown out Conservatives that live in, say, Toronto or Quebec, where there's not as many. So it balances it a little bit more, and it hopefully selects a leader that is popular even where Conservatives aren't that popular, so they can maybe grow. In general, though, it's just a simple one member, one vote. You have to be a party member, and that usually requires, actually signing up and paying money to join the party. It could be as little as $5 depending on the party and depending on the fact of whether you're young or not, but you can vote there. There's also different age requirements. For example, to join the NDP, the party Brianna and I are members of, you only have to be 14 to join the party. So our leader of our party is selected by all party members, including those who are as young as 14. And so that gives a broader franchise than the Democratic and Republican primaries, which require you to be at least 17. And then if you're 17, you have to be 18 by election day in November. Then you can vote. In terms of local ridings, the way it works is that everybody who wants to run has to apply to the party, right? You apply to the party with a vetting package that includes all the information about you, anything that might be controversial, all your social media stuff, all of that. If you've written a book or you've written articles, you provide information about those sources, and the party will choose whether or not to vet you. Then, once they've made those decisions, all of those people will run at the riding level, and then at one meeting, all the members of that party from the given riding, a riding is analogous to a congressional district, will vote, and then the first person to get 50% plus one support becomes the nominee. Now, also in Canada, parties don't always have to adhere to that process. Parties have the leeway to appoint candidates, to remove candidates, and to just deny candidates for whatever reason. So in some ways, we do have a primary process, but it's far less open than the American system, far less open. The party leader has an immense amount of power, and all parties have done this. It's not a partisan thing. Liberals, NDPs, Conservatives, to basically decide who does and does not get to run for their party. It's a significant amount of power that doesn't quite exist in the United States, where anyone can just sort of run in a primary. The American system has its advantages. The Canadian one also has some advantages, but our system is less accessible to political outsiders. I would say, yeah.
Okay. Dan Cordovan says, should Joe Biden drop out and throw his support to Bernie Sanders?
I mean, yes, he should, but he never will. And I mean, if Biden ever dropped out, he would throw his support behind another neoliberal ghoul, right? I mean, if Biden wanted to do what's right for the country and the party, he would support Bernie Sanders. But Joe Biden, I think, one, is too stubborn and vain for that, and knows, most importantly, that goal one in this whole process was stopping Bernie Sanders. The Democrats want to win. Like, they want to win. I'm not like, there's not this conspiracy where they want to lose to Trump. But it is to say that they'd rather lose to Trump than win with Bernie. I really do believe that. And it goes back to what Chris Matthews said a couple weeks before he basically quit TV all of a sudden live on air. He basically said that he's like, Bernie might win this, because this was right after Nevada. So this was before South Carolina. It was that glorious time when Bernie was dominating the contest. And he was like, I think the Democrats might just want to lose if it comes down to Bernie versus Trump. And so I think with that in mind, it shows that if they wanted to win, they would all get behind Bernie. But they don't want to win if it means Bernie wins. And I think that's the issue right now. And so I think a lot of Democrats are getting buyer's remorse about having to back Joe Biden as the anti-Bernie option. I'm sure they much would have rather had, if they could have gone back and said they would have picked Kamala Harris or Cory Booker or lots of other people, maybe some folks that didn't run. But they didn't want Joe Biden, I don't think, but they got stuck with him. Because in this primary, they wanted an anti-Bernie voice. And here's what I think happened. I think they wanted Kamala Harris or Cory Booker. I really do believe that. They're both, whatever you think of them, they're younger, they're sharp, they're eloquent. A lot of the issues you have with Joe Biden, they don't have. And they don't have the personal scandals that Biden has, right? They're better candidates on paper. But because Biden was so strong with African Americans, he crowded out the actual African American people running. And then it came down to Bernie, Warren, who again, they would take Warren over Bernie, but they didn't really want Warren either. Bernie, Warren, and then Biden, and then a bunch of other neoliberals that had no support at all with minorities. And so they knew at some point, it's like basically we're stuck with Joe. And so I think if they could ever force Joe out, it's only going to be to put Cuomo or somebody else in. The goal is still stopping Bernie.
Okay. Super chat from Ben Riley. My argument is if you view political parties like corporations, which they are, that equals monopoly mafia-like systems in all but name, like Crip versus Bloods, Italian versus Irish mob, Coke versus Pepsi, and us in the middle.
Well, I don't know if they're corporations. They are private organizations, more like a nonprofit in a sense, right? I mean, I tend to agree that because they are not public bodies, that they don't necessarily have to operate in the interests of the wider society. And so in the United States, the issue is frankly that their primaries are much more open than the Canadian ones, but ultimately they can sort of do what they want as a party. They can set rules as they want. Parties don't have to have open primaries. They don't have to allow that. They do it for optics reasons or because they feel it maybe helps them pick better candidates, but they don't have to do it. And here in Canada, again, political parties have constitutions and their own rules, but those rules can be changed by the party. A party could say, we don't allow local input on candidate selections, and they'd be allowed to do that. It looks bad, and most parties want to be seen as respecting the will of the grassroots. But, political parties aren't public bodies. They are bodies that are ultimately constrained by their constitutions, their memberships, and in the press, and in the political realm where money is king, the people who donate a lot of money to those parties, big corporations and the rich and wealthy and well connected. Yeah.
Okay. So next question from Stephen Colbert Cheese. Nice to see you, Stephen.
Great to see you. Not the real Stephen Colbert, sorry. We confirmed this
yes,
earlier.
Not the real Stephen Colbert.
Unfortunately.
And he says, why did you wait till the COVID-19 pandemic to sit so close together, though?
Well, I mean, look, we've been self-isolating pretty much the whole time. Brianna has gone into the office a couple days a week, but her office is basically like her alone, almost like she almost has a whole floor to herself. And with the students, gone, our town has way less people coughing on you and stuff. So the reality is that, we're pretty good here. And I work from home. So, I've been I self-isolate most of the time. It used to be that the only time I would ever leave is to take my son out. But now, I'm home pretty much all day, every day anyway. So I think we're pretty good.
Yeah, although I do admit this is not even close to 6 feet apart.
No,
so.
no. Look, the thing is, look, if we were going out all the time, this would not be good. But we're pretty good at self-isolating.
Nathan Drake wants to know how quarantine life has been treating us. Although, quick, because we got a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. For me, it's not a huge change because I'm like a super homebody person. Again, my daily routine used to be I would go get up, take my son out, come home, do a 9 to 5 or whatever, and then go pick him up, and then come home, and then that was it. And the big thing is that we don't do our groceries now. We have our groceries delivered. That was the one thing that's really changed. Even restaurants, we order out fairly frequently, but we don't go out as much because when you have a young baby.
Well, we haven't seen our friends.
Yeah, seeing our friends, but we have done a couple friend night chats, which have been fun. Yeah, video calls.
Okay, Queer Betch says, I would like your take on how terrible the premiers are responding to COVID.
Yeah, the premiers, it's interesting. In general, if you look at the global curves, Canada hasn't done a bad job on the the scientific side. There are lots we could have done better. I think in some ways, for instance, Canada was far too slow to the jump on travelers. Doug Ford at first, our Ontario Premier, was go ahead and enjoy your March break trips. And then a few days later realized how serious this was and pulled that back. And then there was this whole story where it was okay, everyone coming back to Canada from other countries is being asked questions by border, the customs and border security and whatnot, to see if they have symptoms. And if they do, they'll be asked to self-isolate. But there were reporters from Canadian news at the airports talking to people, and most of them were saying they never got these questions early on. And so there were all these issues from the national and local levels that weren't going ahead. And I think that part of this is based on the fact that, I'm not want to defend most Canadian premiers and our prime minister because I don't support most of them. The reality is, though, that some of the things that were done to succeed in places in Asia might not have been acceptable here. Some of the Southeast Asian countries that flattened the curve really fast basically jailed you in a hotel after you got off from a foreign flight. They took you right to a hotel and put an alarm on your door that would sound if the alarm was ever breached. We don't do that in Canada. We could do that, but Canadians might not accept that every person that got off a plane was put into a hotel, whether they wanted to or not, and forced to stay there for 14 days. And I think that and some of these countries, they use apps on your phone to basically track people who traveled foreignly, basically persistent surveillance of people who were suspected of having the illness. I don't know if Canadians would want that either. And so some of this is based on the fact that the Canadian people might not have accepted the level of surveillance and crackdown that flattened the curve in countries like Singapore and South Korea and Japan. That we wouldn't do that. I think it was just they were too slow. They were a little bit too slow, and there were a lot of changes that happened beforehand that hurt us. One big one in Ontario has nothing to do with the actual crisis, but had to do with the fact that the Ontario government cut sick days. Before the last election, one of the few good things the previous premier did was implement, was it 2 paid sick days for everybody?
I think so.
Yeah. Everybody, even if you worked a minimum wage job at McDonald's, you got 2 paid sick days to use every year. Like you get 2 days and you get paid for them. Not enough. Workers need far more than that. But it was like an actual guarantee, even for low-wage, non-unionized workers, that they could take a couple days off a year and not have to worry about losing their pay. And that was taken away, meaning that a lot of workers, likely early on in this crisis, went to work sick, and some of them who might have stayed home didn't, right? And it's these sort of policy decisions that have failed us in some ways more. The Canadian response has failed more in how we haven't protected renters, we haven't protected the most vulnerable, we haven't done those sorts of things. On the crackdown of the actual spread, Canada has done decently, I would say. I would say we've done a decent job overall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Joseph Pangano, who is also a channel member,
Thank you so much, Joseph.
Says, I missed the view today. Did anything of note happen?
Yeah. So if you want a really in-depth look,
Joseph.
Yeah, thank you. So if you want an in-depth look, go check out David Dole, the Rational National. Most of you also follow David. He did one of his videos today, like breaking down this interview. But in general, what happened was it was like an attack on Bernie Sanders. The View is seen as like this like left-leaning show because like everybody, I believe, but Meghan McCain is like a Democrat, but like they're all like anti-Bernie Sanders, all of them, right? And so the promo, like they cut to commercial, and it's like, when we're back, we're going to be talking to Bernie Sanders. Some people are saying he's politicizing the crisis to push his agenda. And some are also saying that Bernie Sanders is helping to guarantee another Trump term by running for too long in this primary. And it's like the whole narrative setup was that Bernie is cynically seizing the coronavirus crisis to push his socialist agenda upon the American people. And then also, because he dares to run in a primary, he's helping Donald Trump. And then so Whoopi Goldberg was like, basically, she was like, how dare you run? It seems like what you're doing is what you're doing to Hillary, what you did to Hillary Clinton, and that hurt her. Not mentioning that Bernie did 41 events for Hillary Clinton, and that Bernie Sanders voters were far more likely to vote for Hillary than Hillary voters were likely to vote for Barack Obama in 2008. And it was just an awful interview from that perspective. It was just like lie after lie, attack after attack. And it was clear evidence that like it's part of this narrative of, you know, setting up like this anti-Bernie like consensus in the media. And of course, none of these sources, none of them have talked about Tara Reade. This is a women's issues focused show. None of them have said anything about Tara Reade. And actually, Tara Reade's story is that last year, Lucy Flores, who also accused Joe Biden, something far less serious than Tara, but accused Joe Biden, and she went on The View, and the ladies of The View ganged up on her for daring to attack Joe Biden. And so Tara Reade remembers seeing that, and she mentions this, I think, in the Ryan Grimm Intercept piece on her and Time's Up. So it was just a scummy interview. It was a scummy interview by some scummy hosts.
Okay, so
we watched Sister Act this weekend. I never really seen it. I thought it was a rather enjoyable movie. Brie loves it. But I said we have to go back and unwatch Sister Act because I don't want to give Whoopi Goldberg my support. We have to go erase it.
Okay, first of all, Whoopi Goldberg from like 1993 is different.
No, Whoopi Goldberg from 1993 was probably still awful.
Stop. Okay. Ben Riley, actual mafia bought politicians, judges, police, and control infrastructure business to function. Al Capone could have probably been mayor if he just had a Valentine. So yeah, the more money that's in politics, there's certainly the more odds that they can be corrupted.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I agree that, like, you know, the organized crime has done things like that. Corporations have done things like that. Wealthy individuals. Yeah, I don't doubt it. But I think that it's just a niche. Yeah,
to limit the effects of money, right?
Yeah. I would certainly say so for sure.
Okay. Brandon Yates says, how much research do you do to make a stand To make a stand on political issues or policy, what articles, news sites, etc. do you trust?
Yeah, I mean,
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is based on my historical knowledge. Craig says the art is not the artist. Don't try to cancel Sister Act. Craig, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
Craig Adolphi?
Yeah.
Oh, I love when he's here.
Yeah. So basically, I read like a lot of Twitter. Other left-wing YouTubers I follow. Mike Figueredo at the Humanist Report, Kyle Kalinske, Michael Brooks, the Majority Report broadly, David Dole. I listen to a lot of these sources. I'll read Jacobin. Jacobin's a source I really like. On the Canadian left, there's Rank and File. I like them sometimes. The T. Passage is a good new magazine. Ricochet is really good. So I'm reading a lot of left-wing stuff. Reddit's a good place to go to get to see what's happening. I don't always agree with the interpretations, but it's a good place to get news. A lot of times I'm basing it on like a mixture of my own historical research. My background is that I have a PhD in history, so I combine a lot of that research passing there. And a lot of it is like just looking at like raw data and raw information, like taking polling information and trying to add an analytical frame to it. So today I did a video which was basically like Medicare for All is rising in popularity in the last month. And I kind of used that to discuss, well, like, why is it rising in popularity? And why is Biden continuing to oppose it? And what does that say about Biden's chances in November? So it's a mixture of reading mainstream news, left-wing news, and just keeping a pulse on social media is how I normally do it. Yeah.
Okay, Shane Barretto says the rough look at the Canadian federal package looks to give around $27.4 billion to people. Parts still need to be approved. The business credit loans that are already approved are around $500 billion. So just the difference between the people and the...
Yeah, there's a lot of money going directly to business, and then there's other money that's like debated. People are having real debates about whether the wage subsidy is for workers or businesses. But in general, the money that's unequivocally going to people isn't enough. And we've talked about this. The CERB is not sufficient enough. It doesn't give money at all to the most vulnerable. There's no provisions to help people who have become partially unemployed instead of fully unemployed. Like let's say you've lost 75% of your hours, can't survive off that, but you're not without a job, so you can't get EI. It's like, what do you do, right? And the reality is that you can't do anything. There's also, but you're right that a lot of these aid packages are business focused. Now there's also questions about is a loan versus a grant. How does are these actually loans, or will the government write them off at some point in the future when people aren't paying attention? I would say in general there needs to be a lot more for people. I think the federal government needs to find some way. And liberals on social media, if you're following social media, are very mad at Jagmeet Singh for suggesting the federal government do what it can to help renters, because it's technically a provincial legislation, but like the reality is that we need to do far more. If the government can bail out corporations, they could help people pay their rent, and I think that we need to take far more of that money and give it to people. That's my view. And greater strings on business. If they want bailout loans, we should get equity in return.
Nelson Ortega says we need to have paper ballots for the remainder of the elections in the primary. Are they still intending to have people come out and vote in person?
From what I've seen, most states have postponed primaries, or they've moved them fully in mail-out ballots. But some of the primaries use voting machines. I think there should not be voting machines as much as possible. Again, I've told this story in Canada that we vote for less things than you guys do. When we have an election, we have one ballot with just a list of names, and we mark one X, fold the ballot, put it in a box. You guys, I know you guys you vote for presidents, you vote for congressmen, you vote for senators, you vote for local officials. You also vote on various ballot measures. Like you sometimes vote for judges and prosecutors. We don't vote for any of that in Canada. We vote for one thing at a time. We vote for our member of parliament. We don't even vote for our prime minister. Our prime minister is selected by the members of parliament. nor do we vote for our members of, or at the provincial level, we vote for our member of provincial parliament. At a municipal election in where we live, you vote for your city councillor by your ward, and then you vote for mayor. That's the only election where we cast 2 votes. So I'm cognizant of why, you might want to use machines if everybody has to mark 10 things on their ballot. But I think as much as you can, paper ballots are still the way to go. It's much harder to rig a paper election than any other election. And that's the thing.
Okay, question related to that. Andrew Skipsey says, just tuning in, given the pandemic, do you think we should be pressing the DNC to make a ruling on whether or not to reduce delegates in delayed states and fight them if they're bad?
Yeah, one of the rules is that for states that push their primary too far back, they get a delegate penalty. I don't know what the rationale is for that. Maybe it's to ensure that everyone gets their primary done with enough time before the convention so that if there's late counting, they don't have to worry about it. But with this time in mind, I don't think anybody should be punished for moving their primary. And I know New York moved their primary back, and I believe they're going to face the delegate penalty. So my view is I'm not an expert on the law surrounding it, but I would personally want to see a challenge to this notion that a late primary right now should be punished because people states moving their primaries are doing so overwhelmingly out of a concern for public safety. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. If we go back to Florida a few weeks ago, that day there were supposed to be 8 primaries and 5 of them canceled, but Florida, Illinois, and Arizona still held their primary. And Bernie Sanders and Brianna Greyjoy or Joy Gray and others on the Sanders campaign were saying to folks, this is dangerous to go and vote. And the neoliberal Democrats lost their goddamn mind, saying Bernie and Brianna Greyjoy and Nina Turner and the left are trying to suppress the vote. They're trying to steal people's democratic right to vote. And you know what happened? A couple weeks after that, Florida saw a spike in corona cases. And then all these people like Neera Tanden were like, oh, geez, maybe I wonder why this is happening in Florida. Well, it's maybe you made 100,000 people, disproportionately older folks, stand in claustrophobic spaces and tightly packed lines to go vote.
Clusterphobic?
Yeah, clusterphobic. I'm phobic of clusters.
Yeah.
So now everyone's like, well, maybe we should postpone these things. So my view is postpone them for as long as is possible, and as much as is possible, give people mail-in ballots. That's my way of doing it. That's my way of doing it. And I think Wisconsin is still planning to hold theirs at the regular time, but Bernie has been pushing for that to be postponed and moved into a mail-in ballot as much as possible. Because right now, guys, it's not safe. It's not safe to do that, and it's irresponsible. And we know why they did that. They wanted as many delegates to be counted while people were ignoring Joe Biden's clear cognitive decline as is possible. So the Biden campaign wanted people to go out and get sick and die. I believe this. I'm not Biden and his campaign were willing to have people die because they wanted those delegates then. They knew, Neera Tanden and all these people knew that people would die because they were holding that primary that day. They knew that. They 100% knew that, and they had nothing to say about it. And the argument from the Biden campaign was, we voted in World War I. We voted during the Spanish flu. We voted in World War II. Why aren't we voting now? That was their argument. It's on them. And so Bernie was the only one giving a damn about people's health and safety. It likely hurt Bernie in those elections because Bernie was telling his supporters to be careful. Biden was telling his supporters to go out and risk it all for his delegates.
Okay, Gamer0099 says, why are you continuing to insinuate that Biden has dementia in your videos when you are not a medical doctor?
Because I have eyes. Biden, guys, whatever you want to call it, Biden is not there. He's not. And here's the thing. I calls him like I sees him. Biden has had all the medical tests done except for a cognitive functioning test. Biden is not there. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Call it cognitive decline. Call it dementia. Call it whatever. He is not all there. It's not. And guys, what's happening with Biden? Like, I'm not saying none of it is Biden himself. The man obviously wants to do this. He thinks he can be president, whatever. He might end up being president. But I think to a certain degree, what we're seeing is a bit of elder abuse too. I really do believe that. The man doesn't know what office he's running for some days. Doesn't know what cities he's in much of the time. Maybe he does now because he's in one city the whole time. And I'm not being ageist. The man I'm supporting is older than him. Right? And let's also be real about this. So many neoliberals are like, none of you guys are medical doctors. But how many of these disingenuous ghouls were going out day after day saying that Donald Trump needs to be impeached because he's mentally unfit for office? So, people weren't diagnosing Trump effectively either. So I'm calling it like I sees it.
Okay, well, maybe we don't have to.
Joe Biden has dementia.
Christo. Joe Biden may have cognitive decline.
Moving on.
Wayne Polk. I'm tired of Trudeau's perpetual op-ed every day talking nonstop, full of attitude on TV. Where was he for the last 2 months?
Say that again.
I'm tired of Trudeau's perpetual op-ed every day talking nonstop, full of attitude on TV. Where was he for the last 2 months?
Yeah, I mean, I get some of it, right? I mean, the prime minister is the head of the country. Canadians want information. They should be able to get it. I feel like he's not being held to account enough in most of these. Like, he got some tough questions when he wasn't closing the U.S. border. He got some tough questions that day because he closed all the borders but the U.S. But it's unfair because this narrative that, like, oh, we shouldn't politicize the coronavirus event. But, like, every day Justin Trudeau gets, like, this massive media spotlight and basically gets to say that, like, oh, we're doing so much to help Canadians. And then, like, it drowns out the rest of the sources. And so when the wage subsidy gets passed, whether or not you support the wage subsidy, right? Whether or not you support that, the NDP made that happen. Like, the NDP made the wage subsidy, at least at the higher level, in combination with some business groups and some unions, like the Steelworkers and Unifor and UFCW, made that happen. And it wasn't mentioned by Trudeau or by the rest of the media. So, Trudeau could have done a lot more in this process. And I think that there needs to be, especially on his failure of his economic package, right? But it's hearing from him every day, I'm not necessarily angry about, because he is the prime minister, and whether we want him to be prime minister or not, I think Canadians like the idea that the prime minister is speaking every day right now. And most of the premiers are doing the same. Like Doug Ford, I think, is out pretty much every day.
Well, our next question is about Doug Ford. So Jake Sisko says, do you think Doug Ford is being given a free pass?
He's being given far too easy of a pass. That's my view. Now, has he done awfully? Has he not done some things well? I won't say that. Doug Ford has in some ways done at least an okay job.
I kicked the camera.
That happens once per stream.
I kicked the camera.
It's once per stream. That Doug Ford hasn't done the worst job, compared to some of the other disasters he's caused. But I feel like because he's not sucking, and much like with Justin Trudeau, because he's being compared to Donald Trump or the worst U.S. governors, he's sort of getting away with it. We have to remember that Doug Ford cut paid sick days, which were expressly designed to give the poorest and most vulnerable workers a way to stay home and protect themselves and their coworkers and their customers without having to sacrifice the little money they have. Mm-hmm. And he took that away. Now, I'm not suggesting that if Ontario had those 2 paid sick days, we would have no coronavirus. But some of the people who got it likely got it because of that policy being cut. Doug Ford, again, also, when a lot of other people were starting to say that international travel was not a good idea, Doug Ford was telling everyone to go away, go away and enjoy their trips. And that means that some Canadians, Maybe he left because they liked Doug Ford and they listened to him and had a hard time getting back to Canada, or when they eventually came back, they brought back COVID-19 or whatever. Yeah, I mean, in general, Doug Ford's been better during the crisis than he has been as a non-crisis premier. But yeah, I'm not willing to give him a ton of praise. And there's a lot of suggestions by the NDP, by the official opposition in Ontario, that I think Ford has failed to implement, but which would have been essential for a lot of working people.
Okay.
But he's not as bad as Kenny. Kenny's been way worse, right? Kenny's worse than Ford. A low bar, but
Okay. Andrew Skipsey says, the national health crisis demonetization proves Douglas Lane's point that capitalism is a censorious system.
Yeah, I could see that. People often associate capitalism with like freedom and liberty, free speech, what have you, but in reality, only insofar as it perpetuates profit motives. And I think that, this idea that capitalism allows freedom in a space like YouTube, it's not necessarily true because, as we've noted, big corporate interests, which drive most of the ad revenue, when they don't like something, when they don't like certain topics being covered, YouTube won't necessarily prevent you from making that video, but they will demonetize that topic, which because a lot of people derive their incomes from YouTube, effectively means that they have to make a choice between their speech and their income. Now, is that censorship in the legal definition? Probably not. I'm wary of the definition of censorship as it's only censorship when the government does it. Because I think that there are some private corporations that have such vast power that they can also effectively censor individuals, at least in a partial sense. But YouTube isn't saying you can't make the videos. They're saying we won't monetize them. But that does have a chilling effect. It's like a chill, like libel chill, where it's like, or patent chill, where like people don't necessarily have to have something happen to them because they fear they will tone down their criticism of something. And so, frankly, it happens on YouTube where it's like, I want to talk about the coronavirus, but how do I talk about the coronavirus in my normal videos without saying the words coronavirus? Because if I say that word, it'll get demonetized.
Now you're just saying it just to say it.
This video's already been demonetized.
It doesn't matter. Okay. Mana Talk with a super chat says Mutiny Monday. Is that a thing that's happening?
I don't know. Mana Talk, let me know. I'm not sure about the reference.
Yeah, let us know in the comments.
Are you guys mutinying me and taking over my channel on Monday?
Yeah, we have a plan.
Oh, see.
Nice, guys. Nice. You ruined everything. Okay. 8NB wants to know if we're lawyers.
We are not lawyers. I have a PhD in history with a focus on labor history and political history. So from time to time, I've examined some labor law. I've written a little bit of contemporary research on labor and the law, coming out actually in a labor law textbook. It's coming out, the Dury edition. I've done some writing on the Rand formula and things like that. So I've read a little bit. And Brianna has a master's degree in history and works as a labor relations basically specialist in some ways. And she does a lot of grievance stuff. So she's not a lawyer, but she reads probably more law than anybody but a lawyer or a paralegal.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. Raw Material ENT says, if you're laid off but technically still employed, yet not receiving income, can you apply for the emergency benefit?
I think you actually are covered. From my reading of the CERB, it is there to help people who are not fired or removed from their position but are receiving no pay. If you're receiving no pay, it is available to you. Like let me pull the CERB up. CERB FAQ. So this is like pretty good. Wait, there was one from the government earlier today. Let me see. Okay. So here it is right here. I'm going to post this in the chat, guys. You might hear Smokey there, our cat. He's sort of a minor celebrity for the new folks here. Check that out. It'll give you like an FAQ. To my knowledge, and again, double check this, people who are without income but are still not technically unemployed are covered. You just have to not be getting income for like I think 2 full weeks.
Okay.
Nope. Samantha Sider with the very well-timed super chat. Here's hoping for a Smokey sighting tonight. And Samantha, I'm not saying your super chat summoned him, but I'm not saying that it didn't. I'm not saying that.
Yes. Okay.
Say hi, Smokey.
Yeah, because I can't hold them forever. Cray97 says, did going on The View actually help or hurt Bernie?
I don't know if it hurt Bernie. Going on to these sources, I think, always gives you the opportunity to reach new audiences. And the people that didn't like Bernie that watched The View, I think were never going to vote for him in the first place. But it allowed him to reach new people. Ironic as it was, The View was far more hostile to Bernie than Fox. But when Bernie Sanders goes on Fox News, he's converting people. There are people who watch Fox News, of course, that would never, ever in a million years ever vote for Bernie or any Democrat or anybody who's not like a Trump Republican. But Bernie probably won over some working class Republicans that, vote Republican because of cultural reasons, but my goodness, they hear Bernie Sanders standing up for the working man and they like that. Or it's an independent who watches Fox and other sources and they saw Bernie on Fox and they like what they heard. There's lots of reasons to do it. In this particular case, I'm not sure if Bernie Sanders got hurt, but, I would say it's almost always worth the risk to go on to media sources like this because you're reaching audiences you normally wouldn't get. And The View is an audience that is generally one Bernie has not tapped into. It's predominantly older women, probably. That's not a good base for Bernie. And so Bernie likely can find growth there.
Okay, Queer Bitch also seemed to summon Smokey.
Yeah.
Here, kitty, Smokey,
well,
haha.
I think that was after, but
really?
I think that was after we saw Smokey. I think with the timing, yeah.
Okay.
It's hard to tell,
Well,
but thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Comrade Internet says, workers are being radicalized between the health crisis, the dying economy, and dank memes.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, memes and the crisis. Yeah, I would say so. And like workers being radicalized and just people being radicalized on certain issues. Like, I really do believe, especially in the US, that like you're seeing Medicare for all. Like my video earlier today, you're seeing Medicare for all go up 10% in support versus last month. And you're seeing that support rise amongst Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And for the first time, I think, in a long time, a majority of independents now support Medicare for all. So, I think that you're seeing a moment where millions of people are going to be made unemployed through no fault of their own, and therefore dozens of millions of people, because it's them plus their spouses in some cases, plus their children, are going to lose health and dental and medical insurance and pharmaceutical insurance. And like, in addition to the crisis, in addition to their lost paychecks, they're going to be worried about their health care. And I think it's in this moment that people will start to change things. And I've talked about this on the channel and when I taught in my university classes, that it's these moments of crises that start to sort of break down the hegemonic block, if I might dip into my Gramsci. And it's in these moments that like the foundation of society turns to putty a little bit. It's like warm clay. It can be remolded. Sometimes not fundamentally, but in important ways. And this is one of those moments potentially where reforms at least can happen, and pretty substantive ones. And it's like people are realizing that the inequalities and suffering that they're facing is not due to like a moral failing. We've talked about it. I think we talked about this last week a little bit, so I won't say too much. But, before the Great Depression, there really was this fundamental viewpoint that if you were unemployed, it's because you were lazy, or you were immoral, or because your family had bad genes and you were the product of bad, and we needed eugenics. But like good, hardworking, white Protestant people with good moral values at home never were unemployed. And if you were unemployed, it's because you were secretly a drunk or whatever, or you were a woman of loose morals or something. And what happened during the Great Depression is that when 30%, 25% of people lost their jobs, no one could be fooled anymore that like a quarter of all people were bad people. And that led to a lot of changes in this. And we've sort of lost that in modern times, where we've re-engaged with that idea that the unemployed are bad people or are somehow deserve their unemployment. And again, when we're in moments like this, where millions will lose their healthcare and their jobs, it gives political space to say, hey, people are not having healthcare right now, not because they're not good enough to get a good healthcare offering job, but because the system is fundamentally broken and nobody should have their healthcare dependent upon their status as an employee. And I think that's an opportunity. I wonder in Canada, I've asked some people around, maybe some people in the chat can say something like, have people been losing their dental benefits and their pharmaceutical benefits? Because in Canada, our basic healthcare is covered, but if you need dental work or if you need medicine, it most often isn't covered. And so a lot of, like with the United States, if your healthcare is connected to your job, here in Canada, your dental care and your medicine is connected to your job. A lot of those people are going to be losing their benefits. And I wonder if that will increase the calls in Canada for dental care and pharmacare.
Okay, Draft Rocks 98 says, what's your take on international production planning to prevent shortages of medical supplies?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on procurement and production. I think in general, some of this crisis has pointed out the failure of profit motives. There were some discussions about how some people were working on products related to the coronavirus, but had to stop production and research because it wasn't deemed profitable. That's obviously an issue. We shouldn't have profit motives drive things. I think in general, whether it's international or whether it's domestic, countries need to have better mechanisms in place to ensure that production for use instead of for profit, especially for essentials, is paramount, and that we do a better job at stockpiling goods like this. I'm not saying, I'm not an expert. Again, I know some medical equipment has expiry dates, but it's not like we're growing apples here or bananas. We can stockpile some of these things better, right? And I think that, so much reliance on profit-oriented industry has left us a little bit behind in being able to get what we need.
Well, and single producers.
And I think better contingency planning about industrial shifting, it would be good. I mean, I know we've seen some of that in countries where companies are making masks, companies are making ventilators, and they weren't mask or ventilator companies. But it would be great if we had that planned out in advance. The next time something like this happens, which companies, if we are going to have companies do it, which companies can and will transition their production as soon as we know we can, rather than have to negotiate it during a crisis. And that could be done on an international basis too.
Okay. Raw Material ENT said, Christo, can you comment on the discrepancy between exit polls and results in the U.S. primaries?
One thing I would say is that there's some different factors here that can be at play. The vote was shifting very quickly on Super Tuesday, at least, and so that might play a role. Exit polls might not have accurately represented who was going into the polling stations. There could have been demographic differences. I know some people are suggesting that's evidence of rigging. And guys, look, I'm not going to 100% say there was no rigging. I'm not. But I'm not going to say that the exit polls being off are direct, irrefutable evidence that the primaries were rigged. I can't go there yet. You know what I mean? Like that's not something I'm comfortable saying yet. I did notice the exit poll discrepancies, but I also noted that the electorate was moving extremely quickly on those final few days, and that might have played a role in the process. Again, another factor. Did they oversample certain groups or undersample certain groups in the exit polls relative to who went in and out of the polling stations? I'm not sure. Beyond that, I'm not an expert on either on this particular case or on the statistics behind exit polls, but I did notice that, and it did seem that the exit polls were consistently overrepresenting what Bernie would get in the polls, in the votes. Is that evidence of rigging? I don't know. It could also be evidence of a quickly shifting electorate.
I don't have a question yet. Keep talking.
Yeah. So that's a rare one. I'm just gonna quickly get a thing of water. I'll be right back.
Are you leaving me to take your show over?
Well, you can if you'd like. I'm just gonna get a quick drink here.
Okay, guys, now's our chance. No. I'm kidding.
No, you go ahead.
No.
Just don't. It's Mutiny Monday.
Well, Mutiny Monday is now Mutiny Wednesday. Don't leave me here.
Yeah. Okay, I'm back.
See, and I got distracted and didn't even find a question.
Oh no. How's everybody doing?
Do you want to talk about like how this crisis is kind of throwing into sharp relief how the underfunding of our healthcare system has been, the last 25 years?
Yeah, 100%. Lack of available beds. Canada's bed availability is below the OECD average, and that's one of the big challenges right now is hospital capacity. So that's a major issue. Specifically, underfunding in long-term care facilities is a big issue in Canada, in Ontario in particular, but also, I don't know if it's worse in Ontario, but we live in Ontario, so we know. But we know that a lot of older folks and people who have to live in care homes do not have proper conditions. The workers that work in those places often are underpaid and overworked. And when you add all of that up, what effectively happens is that it puts a lot of people in danger. And so from my viewpoint, our failure to have strong health care and specifically our failure in long-term care facilities has played a role in this crisis. It really has. Yeah. And I mean, you're seeing even in New York, a lot of people are praising Andrew Cuomo, but Andrew Cuomo is attacking New York's healthcare infrastructure, or he was at least, as this crisis was unfolding. And so we could do a better job. We could.
Okay, we have 2 super chats. So one is from Jason Fu. Thank you so much, Jason. He says, love what you're doing. Christo, thank you for your contributions. Let me buy you guys a dinner. I hope your channel gets more popular, which I believe it will. Well, thank you very
Jason,
much. I really appreciate that.
That was very generous. Thank you so much. Everyone is very generous, but Jason, thank you so much for that.
Now you can take me out.
Social distancing when social distancing is done, we'll go out for a very nice dinner. Thank you so much, Jason. We really appreciate that.
Okay. Alexander Watt says, will the crisis make absentee ballots universal?
I mean, maybe. I know so for those who are Canadians, we don't do that. We basically, are there even absentee ballots? I don't even know if we do that at all in Canada, do we?
You mean if you live abroad, like expats?
Yeah, maybe people who live abroad, yeah. But mostly, we don't have mail-in elections the same way. But in the States, I know some states, they mail everyone a ballot. I like that idea. One, it supports good unionized postal workers, but I like that idea of everyone getting a mail-in ballot and having the time to vote when they can, ensuring everyone gets to them. You don't have to worry about polling stations. This could encourage more of that. It's not a guarantee that it'll be universal, but I think that as people realize that there are certain susceptibilities with single day, vote on this day and everyone go to the polling station, and maybe people will like mail-in ballots, you might see more states move to that. I don't think this on its own is going to say that by 2024, let's say, every election is mail-in, but I wouldn't be surprised if more states become predominantly mail-in ballot states. And I think that's for the better.
8NB wants to know what's the NDP.
The NDP is the New Democratic Party. It's sort of Canada's party of the left. If I was to put it in the American spectrum, it's obviously to the left of the Democrats, and it would likely include people like Bernie, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, but it would not include like Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg. Elizabeth Warren would be on the right wing of the NDP, probably on the rightmost wing of the NDP, or she would be just outside of it as a perspective. It's a historic party. It was founded in Canada's Great Depression. Sort of a mixture of farmers and trade unionists and ivory tower academics. So got together to mash a party together. It's similar to the Labour Party, not the Blairite Labour Party, but it's similar to the Labour Party that you see in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and things like that. So yeah, that's Canada's party of the left. It's never formed federal government. It's never had the most seats in Canada at the federal level, but it has formed governments at the provincial level. So it's sort of like if you guys had Bernie at a third party that had, a few dozen seats in the Congress and was a few governors in the country now and then were say Democratic Socialists. So a strong third party is what it is. Yeah.
Okay, Tyler Zimmer, and I think this is going to be my last question, and then I'm going to go to bed. Tyler Zilmer says, any chance Bernie runs as a third person at the presidential debate and runs as a socialist or Democratic Socialist Party rather than the DFL?
I don't think so. I think if Bernie was going to run as an independent, he would have just done it. Like, he would have done it in 2015 or whenever. But I think Bernie, whether we like it or not, whether you like it or not, I think when Bernie got into this primary, the assumption from Bernie himself was that he would respect the results of the primary. And so, in 2015, 2016, he went out and he campaigned for Hillary. And he campaigned hard for Hillary, right? Harder than Hillary ever did for Barack Obama. There were some weeks of the campaign where Bernie campaigned for Hillary more than Hillary campaigned for Hillary. Like, I trust that if Bernie loses, he will drop out and he will endorse Joe Biden and he will do events for Joe Biden if Biden wants him to do events for him, and he will encourage people to vote for Joe Biden. Whether we like that or not, that's besides the point. And this is not going to become a vote blue no matter who channel, nor will it become a channel that rejects people who do want to vote for the Democratic nominee ultimately. The channel is going to be one that holds all people running to account as honestly as I can, and that'll be that. But I think that Bernie is going to endorse the Democratic nominee. I do believe that. Yeah.
Okay. Put your thing all the way to the top.
Yeah. So I'm moving up to the top of the thing here. I'm going to follow through. Brianna's going. She has to get up and work tomorrow morning. So from home, which is nice.
Yay, quality time together. Don't touch me. Hey. Okay. Good night, everybody. You're so weird.
Okay. I love you.
Love you.
Okay. So I'm going to just kind of follow along with questions. I'm going to do my best to keep up with questions here. Per se, Sebra says that Bernie is losing the present, but he's winning the future. I mean, yeah, I can see that to some degree. There are candidates sometimes, and there are ideas that take time. And I'm not saying like that, like I've resigned to the fact that Bernie is going to lose, or that at the end of the day, he is like, it's over. But I do think that there are some politicians that just have ideas that are before the public's time. And you notice this. And here in Canada, we've had the same thing where you have politicians in the NDP or in the CCF, talking about things like gay rights before anybody else was. Like Bernie was doing that. Bernie, back when he was mayor of Burlington, was supporting the LGBTQ community at a time where almost nobody else was doing it in the country, right? At all, let alone elected officials. And now, like, you almost have to be, at least pretend to care about LGBTQ issues to have a future in the Democratic Party. Like, it's almost a guarantee now that you have to. And so, like, Bernie helped to bring that transformation. And it's like, Bernie talked about a lot of the reforms we're seeing. Like, now everybody in the Democratic Party basically has to support a $15 minimum wage. 4 years ago, almost no one did that. So you're right. To a certain degree, Bernie Sanders is influencing the future of American politics in a profound way, and for the better. The U.S. has 330 million people, and the two candidates for the presidency may be Trump and Biden. I mean, yeah, it's they're certainly not sending their best, folks. They're certainly not sending their best and brightest. Yeah, Jason Kenney's been really bad, right? So for those who don't know, Jason Kenney is the Premier of Alberta, which is one of Canada's western provinces, and probably has the most conservative provincial government in Canada. And it basically has done the least amount for regular people. Like, Doug Ford's done more. He's been more proactive at protecting folks. He hasn't done enough, don't get me wrong, but he's been way better. And like, Ford hasn't laid off a lot of public workers, whereas Jason Kenney just laid off 25,000 like educational support staff, and put them on the unemployment rolls, which is going to be hard on the economy because small businesses and companies are already having a hard enough time without the consumer bases. So he's been by far the worst. He's been the worst premier thus far. I don't know. Somebody was implying that I should run for. I don't think I would run for president. I am. Yeah, I am too young, to be president. One, I'm not American, so so I could never be American president. I don't like that. You guys got to change that rule. I feel that for a country that is all about equality of opportunity, the idea that immigrants can't be president, I think, is stupid. So I'm not going to go on a rant about that. I think any American citizen should be able to become president. In Canada, any Canadian citizen can be. And in the US, you got to be at least 35, I believe. In Canada, there is technically no minimum age to be prime minister. Our prime minister could be 18 years old. Unlikely, I don't think that'll ever happen. But our prime minister could be 18. No, I am currently 33 years old. I just turned 33 on March 28th. Vaudra says they don't have to demonetize you. Just put 10-minute ads, which people won't watch all the way through. Sick of Nicole's cooking. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, with the way ads go is that, like, they're totally random, right? They're totally random. I don't know how. It's based on a bunch of factors. My demographics, like who I am, the content I make, but also who you are. So based on your age, based on where you're from, based on what the other channels you watch, based on probably on other ads you've seen on other Google platforms, like on Google search engines, Google will target ads to you. So the ads that you get on this channel when you watch one of my videos could be totally different from someone else because of where you live, or because you're a man or a woman, or because you're younger or older. That'll affect what the ads you get. Stephen Colbert, we're going to take over and turn this into pro Biden channel. Please don't. Please don't. Smokey for channel leader. Love that. Love that a lot. Everyone says that if I can't ever stream again, like I lost my voice a couple weeks ago, that maybe Smokey could do a stream. I'd love that. Samantha, you did call it, Samantha. Karen Sita, very excited to see Smokey. I'm going through the chat here. I love this. I love doing this, going through. Yeah, I mean, I think it's good that Bernie goes on The View. I mean, the interview on The View was awful to him. It was really bad, but it was still like something he needed to do, right? It was still something that he needed to do. You need to go onto those sources and try to reach people that like you normally can't get to, right? Will says, "Do you think Bernie can still win?" Will, thanks for the question, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. I do. It's sort of weird, right? Because if you look at the math, and like the gap between Bernie and Biden, and then the amount of delegates left, it's very clear Bernie can still win. There's still like well over 1,600 delegates left, thousands of delegates left in some ways, and yet there's like it's hard to catch up because of the proportional system. So if Bernie, say, wins a state by 5%, then he'll catch up to Biden, but he might only catch up 10 or 20 delegates, maybe less. And so he needs to start winning these states by bigger margins. So for Bernie to win, he really does need to start racking up victories, and they have to be big victories. Bernie winning every remaining state by really small margins might not be enough. He has to start scoring some big wins. And the challenge for Bernie is that, like, a lot of the states that were good for Bernie have already gone down. And so my concern is it's hard for him to catch up, although it's not impossible. And I would say that, Bernie might have dropped out in a different scenario, but because this current crisis has really shown that Bernie is a real leader, that Joe Biden isn't, and that it's kind of proven Bernie right, especially on healthcare, that I think it's important he stays in. I do think he can win, but like, if I'm being honest, more likely than not, he might not, he probably won't be able to. But it doesn't mean that he should stop. Boomer for Bernie too. Yeah, it's great to see boomers for Bernie. That's one thing I need to note more. When I've said on the channel, guys, that like boomers are part of the reason Bernie's losing, I'm not suggesting that all boomers are at fault or that Bernie doesn't have boomer support. But it is to say that I've never seen such an age divide in like politics. Like, the split in age between Bernie and Biden is so stark. Like, there are states, guys, where Bernie lost to Biden by like 30 or 40 points. And Bernie still won young people. Like, that has to mean that older folks are almost exclusively in some of these states voting for Joe Biden. And like, it really is something to like examine, because like, why this sharp divide? Not all boomers, but why are so many boomers rejecting Bernie Sanders? Like, why? Like, why is that happening? Bernie should join a YouTuber's live stream. That would be great if Bernie just showed up. I would love that. If Bernie showed up to this stream, guys, I would be so happy. Bernie has done some interviews. I think he did an interview with Kyle Kalinske last year. It was really cool to see that. Will says, or asks, do you hate how corporate media ignores Bernie but falls over Biden? Yeah, of course. I mean, last year especially, we noted this on the channel, back in 2019. Where the media was largely focusing on how, like, everyone else existed but Bernie. And Bernie would almost never get mentioned. You guys remember, it was way back earlier in the contest where Bernie was like second place, as he was for most of the contest. There was a couple months where Warren was in second, when Bernie had his heart condition, right? But where there was a poll, it was like Biden in first, Kamala Harris in third, Warren in fourth. I was like, well, who's in second? And that was the headline. Basically removing Bernie Sanders from his numerical position in the race. And so I would say that like now, the media's sort of gone back to ignoring him a little bit. But for much of this year, they haven't been ignoring Bernie, but they were just lying about him. They couldn't ignore him anymore because he was the front runner or he was clearly in second. And so they couldn't ignore him. But my goodness, do they lie about Bernie? Do they lie? My goodness. Bernie does live stream a lot. He does so much. Bernie's really good at his online presence. Yeah, Corbin Rempel asks about Alberta and fighting back. I mean, on the ground in Alberta, there are a lot of people on various issues fighting back against this government on healthcare, on education, on climate. There's really good podcasts. Alberta Advantage is really good. Check them out. Get involved with some of these groups that are standing up. Right now, you're right. I mean, I'm not sure. The next election in Alberta is not for a while, but there are already indications that Albertans are starting to tire on Jason Kenney and his government. And this was a government they gave a very big majority to. This was one of the few governments in Canada, because we have a multi-party system where most provinces have at least 4 or 5 parties contesting the election, where you almost never see one party get more than 50% of the vote, right? And so this was a rare example of the Alberta Conservatives getting over half the vote in their province, right? So that's definitely something that people are starting to sour on. Somebody asks, are you Portuguese or Brazilian? People asking me, I'm like, well, my mother was born in northern New Brunswick. She was of Madawaska, French Canadian descent. My father was born in Greece. So I guess you might call me half Greek, half Canadian, French Canadian, what have you. Roberto Garcia, I quit my shitty job in December, went back to school, lost all my savings, and stock market crash. Just read the CERB FAQ, and I don't think I am eligible. Well, Roberto, I can't 100% comment on that, but I think that in general, the rule is you need to have earned so much money in the last 12 months, and you needed to be employed and lost your job because of this, right? Which again, I think is bullshit, because I think if you're unemployed because you can't find a job because no one's hiring because of the coronavirus, then you should also be eligible for assistance, right? So yeah, it seems like you're ineligible, but if you're unsure, Roberto, I encourage you to try to contact them and get a sense for if you might be qualified. Because I don't want you to not try to get it and when you actually were eligible. But it does seem like you're one of the people that needs help, should get some help, but the system isn't helping. Joseph, should Joe Biden add an exclamation point to his name like Jeb? I don't know. I mean, look, Maybe add like maybe add a no malarkey superscript. Maybe. Yeah, Daphris has said that 3D printing is playing a role, and some industries have found some ways to use 3D printing to help with this. Yeah, that's a pretty novel thing. Yeah, Sinistoria says I was supposed to have a dental cleaning and it got rescheduled. Yeah, that same thing happened with me as well. I had one scheduled for last week, I think, and all non-essential dental work is basically being pushed back. Yeah. Yeah. And they're probably because if somebody needs like emergency dental work or they have a surgery, I'm sure that the dentists are still doing it. But clearly, something like the coronavirus would be immensely devastating because it spreads through the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And you like the dental, like the way dentistry is done is that, my God, like people would get so sick if the dentists were open. 100%. It would be. People saying the Brianna show. Love that. I was just going to get a drink. Nathan says, Brie is shy. The thing is, Brie's not shy in general. Brie's very outgoing. She's very ambitious. Speaks to big crowds often. Has done TV interviews and stuff like that. I don't know. She's not usually that shy. Karen, don't leave me here. I'm just getting into this moment. So Roberto, again, I'm sorry if I didn't see your question originally, Roberto, but saying, do you think somebody who was laid off, unemployed but not laid off because of COVID? It doesn't look like it. Again, it looks to be, did you earn $5,000 in the last 12 months? And were you rendered unemployed because of COVID-19? If yes, or I don't even know if you have to, yeah, then you are eligible. But if, for instance, you were looking for a job 2 weeks ago or whatever, and you were still looking, and then you find you're not eligible and you don't have one, it does not look like you're eligible. Even if you have earned the $5,000. It's a bad aid program. Yeah, Joseph says, did I follow the K-Hive Brianna Joy Gray run-in? I did. I was thinking about making a video of it, but I decided against it for a bunch of reasons. It was late last night. I was tired. And also, like, I didn't know how to do it algorithmically and doing justice to everybody, but we could talk a bit about it here. Basically, Kamala Harris tweets out that no one should have to pay for the testing and treatment of the coronavirus, right? Like, you shouldn't have to pay to get tested, and you shouldn't have to pay to get treated. And then Brianna Joy Gray tweets out, who is, for those who don't know, is Bernie's, like, national press secretary, press officer, basically says, great, but what about other illnesses? Should people not be able to get treated and tested for cancer without having to pay for it? And then a bunch of people attacked her because apparently Kamala Harris's mother died of cancer. But of course, cancer's like the number 2 killer in America, right? It's like many people die of cancer. It's just something that people die of, right? And they all like said, oh, Bernie Sanders' campaign and Brianna Joy Gray is there. She's toxic. She hates Kamala Harris. She's trying to politicize this moment. She is making fun of Kamala Harris's mother. And it was just the most ridiculous thing. But it got really ugly when like all of these like neoliberal pundits and like think tank types and political PR people were all like, Brianna Joy Gray is going to be unemployed forever. If you ever want a job in this town again, think again. Like, this is the end. We're going to end you. Young people that want to work in politics never do what Brianna's doing, or, you know, you're going to find yourself unemployed. And so because she raised a fair point, which is that if you believe that this crisis should be covered fully, then the only rational belief is that Medicare for all should exist for everyone for all illnesses. She was basically deemed like a pariah. It was absolutely awful. I stand in solidarity with Brianna Joy Gray, 100%. The way she was treated was terrible. Like, bad enough that they were trying to insinuate she was mocking Kamala Harris. That was bad enough. But when they started threatening this young woman's career, basically saying that they wanted her blacklisted from, like, the industry, it was actually quite disturbing. Okay, Andrew says that in Canada we do have mail-in ballots. Most people in Canada still vote in person. We have a lot of advanced voting days in most provinces now. Sometimes it's like for like 2 weeks before the election, you can go into the polling office and vote. Like there's a lot more advanced voting in Canada than there is mail-in ballots, but there are some mail-in ballots. Yeah, Nathan makes a point that the Aussie Labour Party is pretty neoliberal. I think some of the things with a lot of these parties is that there are wings in the party, but in general, like the Labour Party, like the NDP comes from the Labour Party tradition and not like the Liberal Party tradition, right? So like the Lib Dems and Liberal Party have their own like historical traditions, but the NDP comes out of the Labour Party tradition. Invisible Man says Ed Broadbent came close. Ed Broadbent did have a good election in 1988. There was a time. So did Jack Layton. But, you know, we've never formed government in Canada. Prince Buster Jr. says, New York City here. Love your work. Thank you so much. Love seeing where people are from. We have people here sometimes from Europe and from Australia and all over, and I really love to see that. Vaudrey says that Nikki Ashton and Leah Gazan, two really great members of parliament from the NDP, are saying that cases in Manitoba are underreported. I wouldn't be surprised if cases all over Canada, and indeed much of the world, are underreported. Because I know in Canada, and I'm not saying this is the doctor's advice, so I'm not saying it's wrong, but like if you feel that you have the coronavirus and you have all the symptoms, but you're like young and healthy and you're not experiencing like breathing issues, then the doctor's recommendation is to just stay home and self-isolate for 14 days. Like, don't go outside, don't do anything. Like, when you have the symptoms. Don't even go for a walk. Just stay inside. And so those people might have it, but they'll never be tested because unless it's serious, they don't want to drag you out to the hospital where you could risk infecting people along the way. Or maybe you don't have it, but now you do because you went to the hospital. And they'd rather you just stay home. And so a combination of certain populations, marginalized populations, maybe indigenous people, poor people, not getting the testing they need, or people that maybe have it, but as long as it doesn't look like they're going to need immediate medical care, there's no point in testing them. Almost certainly means there's less corona, or there's more cases everywhere in the world than are being reported. Almost certainly. We're only reporting cases that we have knowledge of. Yeah, Craig giving some good advice here how our elections work. After the election, every party can send a scrutineer to count the ballots, or the counting is done by Elections Canada staff or elections of the particular province. They say Elections Ontario, but you can have your eyes there. And actually, if there are disputes, like let's say somebody fills in a ballot but they don't mark an X all the way, you can advocate for your candidate. Hunter says, is Biden going to make it to the election? It's a good question. I think he probably will. I think that he's clearly suffering. He's clearly struggling. But he is able to stay home most of the time. So maybe that's a benefit of him. He can spend more of his day resting. The question is that, like, does he have what it takes to win the election? Will he be able to hang on in that sense? I'm not sure. This could be a really interesting election campaign because if this goes on long enough, then both him and Donald Trump will have to kind of do remote campaigning. Monica says Christo and Brianna equal ultimate couple goals. Yeah, I mean, as biased as I am, I think it's pretty good. Convert Chronicles, Bernie's policies are way more progressive than Canada. Yeah, currently than what we have. I'm just saying Bernie in which party he would fit in would definitely fit in within the NDP. He would be not at the leftmost wing. We have some more ardent socialist NDPers, but he would be, I think, smack dab in like the NDP. I would say. He is pushing for some of the things that the left, that the NDP is pushing for. Great expansions to healthcare, better worker protections, trade deals that recognize the needs of workers and of the environment more than the neoliberal trade deals. So he would definitely fit within the NDP. Now that Brianna is gone, time to talk Christo Ball. Yeah, we talked about Christo Ball last time. There was a game I invented. Let us never speak of it again. No, I'm just kidding. It was just things you do when you're bored. The Green Party in Canada doomed the NDP. I'm not sure about that. I mean, certainly the Green Party and the NDP do share some voters, so it makes it hard for them both to grow. But I think in a lot of ways, the NDP has remained remarkably consistent with its level of support. Certainly it has less seats now than it did back in 2015 and 2011 after those big elections. But the NDP has, been the only third party in Canada that's been consistently strong and consistently there for more than, 20, 30 years. Canada has two traditional parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives. Both of them have existed in some form since 1867. Like, the founding of Canada as an independent country from the United Kingdom. But the CCF is the only other really old third party. All the other third parties are either very small and they don't win seats, or they are they're newer. Like the Green Party, it has only really existed for 20, 30 years, and same thing with the Bloc Québécois. The NDP has existed as the NDP since 1960-61, but it's existed as a party as the CCF since 1932. Excuse me. Christopher Belly. I'm loving this. Yeah, Jason Kenney was a former Minister of Immigration. Yes, he did play a role in the Harper government. And it's actually rather interesting that he was credited with Harper's success because he was seemed as very skillful at outreach to immigrant communities. And it was... Sinistoria says, I wrote a history book about Pierre Trudeau. I did indeed. It's up on the shelf. Which one is it right here? This one. Yeah. I wrote a history book about Pierre Trudeau. It's with UBC Press. You can just find it if you Google The Constant Liberal Christo Aivalis. It's a good book. You could find it also probably in local libraries, especially if you have a university library in your community. You can find it there. But it's definitely something you could check out. University libraries are often open to the public. Libraries are probably closed now, but you know what I mean. Joseph says, happy belated birthday. Thank you so much, Joseph. Dude Man says, what? You're older than me? Dude, you look 21. How the F do you look so young? I am so envious. Well, look, I've been an academic. I had real jobs in high school. Like I worked at like McDonald's and Tim Hortons and things like that. But since the third year of university, I would say, I worked as a research assistant in like my third and fourth year summers. And then I went to grad school where basically I sit around all day and read and write. And then after I did my PhD, I basically did the same thing. And, I just do research and I make YouTube videos. So I don't have a very strenuous job, at least in a physical sense. So I've been, my youthful visage has been spared. Yeah, everyone, yeah. People are saying happy. Yeah, my birthday was on March 28th. Joseph says, "Okay, are you in Canada or the U.S.?" I'm in Canada. I'm in Canada. Jera says, "Christo, nice wife, nice cat. Thanks for keeping it clean." Thank you so much, Jera. I see you look. I look very young. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think that's a compliment. Yeah, N says that the 2K a month in Canada is brought up as a UBI. Yeah, it's not, right? It's for 4 months, so it's not ongoing. And two, it is heavily means tested. It perversely, again, it's not only like it only benefits people who were fortunate enough to have a job, have earned enough money, to not have fully lost their job. Like, it doesn't even help other people. Like, for instance, it's good in some ways because if you were like a freelancer that now has no work, you're eligible. But if you're a freelancer who lost almost all of your work, but not all of it, like you lost 95% of your clients, but not 100%, you're not eligible. And so, in so many ways, it leaves a lot of people out. So, it's not a UBI in any way. The NDP, which is it's not fully supportive of an UBI going forward because there are real concerns from unions in Canada about the effects of a UBI, and the UBI as opposed to a job guarantee and things like that. But for the emergency scenario, the NDP wanted a UBI. Like for the emergency, we were very much like we need we need uh everyone or as many people as is possible to get this money because they need it now. People need support like now, right? If they don't get it now, like people are going to suffer. So give everybody money. Some won't need it. That's the challenge now. Figure it out on the taxes next year. That was our view because right now it's leaving out too many people. Too many people are unsure about whether or not they qualify. Some people that really, really do need the money are not getting it, and it's a travesty. Dude Man says with the super chat, thank you so much, Dude Man. In an era of hyperstimulation, how do you remain on task? I'm addicted to my phone and I am constantly on YouTube instead of making the music I want to. Yeah, look, it's hard, right? It's hard because, whether it's family, whether it's other things going on, I have the same issue sometimes. Luckily, sometimes my being hyper connected is good for this particular work because you're always reading what's happening. A story breaks. I'm like, that's a good idea for a video. I can hop on and make the video. But I won't lie and say that like it's very hard to like do focus on writing something or doing like long form reading when there's all this going on. When I do writing, it's very hard to like not go on Twitter, not go on Facebook. I think it's like you just gotta like plug away. You gotta set yourself like bite-sized goals and achieve them. Don't say like I'm gonna get all of this done in one day. Say that like I'm going to, start the project. And often you find that once you start something, it's much easier to continue going. Gara says, Christo, you can't stop the age hate speech. Gara, like, I know you've had discussions with me about this, and look, it's not hate to say that older folks disproportionately are voting for Joe Biden, or in a general election, they'll vote for Donald Trump. Like, that's the reality, right? And so why that's the case, or why you're different from other elderly folks or older folks or boomers or whatever, is an interesting discussion. But I don't think it's wrong to look at that data, and I feel like it would be wrong for me not to. Like, to really have an understanding, and like let's look at why, like, under 45, but especially say under 35, Bernie is winning big, and over 45, and especially say over 55, Biden is winning. And why is that? When we really get an understanding of, like, what are the different priorities, and what does that say about politics today and, say, politics 10 years from now, because it really does demonstrate that, like, there's a sharp age divide. Amano says, hey, Christo from Montreal. Oh, great to see you. I'm from Kingston. It's just a couple hours away. As a Canadian, I don't understand why Bernie is losing, even though most Americans agree with his policies. So frustrating watching this situation. Well, as you might know as a Canadian, we have the same thing with the NDP. And most of Canadians agree with the NDP on most issues, and they vote for the Liberals or what have you. A big part of it was strategy in Canada, the fear that you would elect Conservatives, even in ridings where the Conservatives are in third or fourth. But in the United States, what ended up happening was, I believe, a fundamental assumption from much of the Democratic voting base that Joe Biden was the one that could defeat Donald Trump. And for a long time, that was the case. If you watch my videos from like November, December, January, whatever, where Bernie was starting to catch up to Joe Biden, but he wasn't there yet. The thing that was holding him back was the question of electability. That Bernie was like beating Biden in terms of like, who supports your values? Who do you think cares about you and people like you? And it was Bernie Sanders winning those numbers, beating Biden big. But then it was like, who do you think can beat Trump? And Joe Biden was that guy. And for a few weeks, basically from Iowa to the day before South Carolina, Bernie was winning those numbers. Bernie was winning big in that leadership question. But then it all flipped, and it really seems like, despite the fact that people in the Democratic Party want Medicare for all, they want many of Bernie's policies, they just fundamentally feel that Joe Biden's the one that can beat Donald Trump, and they're going with him. Whether that's accurate or not is besides the point. That is their belief. Shredder saying Bernie got a free honeymoon to the Soviet Union paid for by taxpayers. Bernie going to the Soviet Union was super cool, actually. It's so funny when you see either, whether, I don't know if you're a Trump supporter, Shredder, or if you're a Biden supporter. From that tweet, I can't tell the difference. But it's like this narrative you get with Bernie where it's like back in the 1990s, Bernie Sanders radically suggested that workers should have human rights. And it's like, yeah, cool, bro. Or it's like back in the 1980s, Bernie Sanders felt that like the United States shouldn't just rationally hate the Soviet Union. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great. Or it's like back in the 1970s, Bernie wanted to nationalize some industries. And I'm like, yeah, because that was the right thing. Like, Bernie should bring that back. Like, every time one of these secret things about Bernie comes out, I'm like, you're just making him look cooler. The white community. I just got here. Do you already hate me? I don't know if that is troll bait. I don't tend to hate people I don't know, but you might also be a white nationalist. So if you are, I probably do not like you. Shredder says Bernie is a multimillionaire. He gets paid off by people to do with favors. Bernie has more money than most regular people. But Bernie's level of wealth is rather typical for an upper middle class, lower upper class person who's had a successful career. Bernie also has 3 places to live. That argument's been made. One of them is a very humble cottage. We see his house in Vermont. It's a regular person house. That's you've seen inside of it. You guys, we've seen inside of it because of all the social distancing. Bernie lives in like a regular like person house. You might live in a house like that. You might have friends. Maybe if you don't live in a big city like Toronto, but if you live in a smaller town, you might live in a house like Bernie Sanders. And then like Bernie has a property in Washington, I believe, because he's a senator. Lots of politicians have that. Bernie is a millionaire in a sense. But Bernie Sanders has earned almost entirety of his money off his own labor. He's much like a doctor or a lawyer, more than like some corporate bigwig. He makes a lot of money. He worked very hard for that money. But Bernie Sanders would be the first person to tax the heck out of Bernie Sanders, which I think tells you something. Yeah, people are noting, Greg says, no bank account, no address, no roof, no job, no relief check in the USA. To my knowledge, Greg, you don't need a job, but you are making a good point that with a lot of these relief programs, even when they are widely spread, they can often leave out the most vulnerable. They can leave out a lot of people. And so even if it was universal, the CERB in Canada, it would be really challenging to ensure that, say, homeless people got the money. People who haven't filed their taxes in a long time, making sure that they have the ability to get their banking information, got the money. It's like these are all things that we have to really think about that we haven't been doing. Luke says, hi, Christo. Do you speak any other languages? French is my first language. I speak a bit of French. My French is better in terms of my ability to comprehend it, whether it's reading or listening or what have you, than speak it, because it's hard to speak a language in real time. But a lot of my research for my dissertation was done in French because it was on Pierre Trudeau, including some of his earlier years where most of his writing and most of his correspondence was in French because he was in Quebec. Yeah, both. Well, yeah. Joseph saying, like, Biden check out Biden's 1998 presidential run termination. Look, Biden's got a ton of skeletons, guys. He has got, he has gotten a ton of, like, bad press already, and it's going to hit so hard. So Biden's got, obviously, like, the I'm going to cut Social Security recordings. He's got, like, the I supported the Iraq war thing. He has the Anita Hill scenario, like, where he just berates Anita Hill with, like, anti-woman and racist tropes. He has the Tara Reade story and the Lucy Flores story, among others, but the Tara Reade's the big one. He also has the 1988, which I actually forgot about, Joseph. It's that bad. I forgot about it. Until you reminded me, where Biden ran for president in 88 and basically dropped out because he plagiarized a speech from a British politician. He basically pilfered a speech and then basically forced him to drop out. And so Biden has basically been a walking controversy for much of his career. Like, I don't see him faring well in a general election. Even when you look beyond, like, the cognitive issues. Ben Riley says, partner with HR, secular talk, etc. I don't know what you mean. If I'm planning anything in particular, not necessarily. As you guys know, I did a brief guest spot for the Humanist Report a few weeks ago when Mike was away because he had a family passing, and I was very happy to do so, and that was fantastic. I'd always love to do it again. I'm not in too much contact with Kyle. Kyle and I follow each other on Twitter, but I've never actually directly engaged with Kyle Kalinske as much. But, I have been, on David Dole's show. I've been on Michael Brooks. So I'm sure that, in some time in the future, we'll find some reason to collaborate, but we have nothing planned right now. NWO Taxman says, is Bernie the lowest paid U.S. senator? I'm not sure about senators by net worth. I mean, I think they all get paid the same amount, right? Senators by wealth. So if you go senators by net worth, Bernie Sanders is right now sort of in the... this is by the top 40. So it's by the top 40, I think, here. Bernie Sanders is not in the top 40. So I don't know exactly what that is. Bernie Sanders' net worth, let me see. This was from September 2019. This is looks to be... That's like a junky website. Let me see. So Bernie is not in the top 10, but he's not in the bottom 10 either. I think it likely means that Bernie Sanders is limited by the fact that he doesn't make a lot of big investments, but he's also been a senator for a long time and he's an older guy. So if you compare that to somebody who's, say, a younger senator, it might explain things. And also, Bernie wrote some very successful books. Andrew says that the COVID-19 death rate is as high as 5.01% in the US. That's actually quite a bit higher than it is in Canada, at least as it's being reported. It seems like Canada is similar to Germany, which is that we have cases, obviously, but Canada is managing to keep the rate in and around 1% or so. Germany as well. Whereas the US seems to be closer in level to Spain and Italy, which is obviously troubling. Because at 5%, if if you get a few 100,000 cases, that means that a lot of people are going to lose their lives. Samantha Sider says, Christo Aivalis, would it make sense for California to split into 6 or 7 states? I mean, I'm not an expert on the geography and culture of California. If there could be 6 or 7 states. I know it's a very, very, very big state. And so there's a lot of in terms of population. And so there's a lot of discussion about how there could be benefits for dividing in 2 or something. I don't think splitting it into 6 or 7 would make a whole lot of sense, because then it would be, quite a bit smaller than some of the other big states, unless you were planning to split New York and Texas and Florida and the other most populous states. I mean, I have heard discussions about splitting it into 2, maybe North and South California, but there's a lot of things there. On the one hand, that obviously gives them more, it gives them more political influence because it'll double the amount of senators from California, right? It'll have South California gets 2 and North California gets 2. But the question is still going to be, what about resources? What about public services? Some of those things will become more expensive because you'll have to duplicate certain bureaucratic infrastructures. You'll need 2 different state police services and stuff. So I'm not sure about that. I've heard some rumor that like that's one way that California could shift the power brokering of American society by becoming 6 states and balancing out the fact that the Republicans have a whole bunch of really small states that are also always sending 2 senators that are right wingers. But I'm not sure. Beyond that, I don't know. It's possible, but I don't see that. If it does happen, it's going to be a split into 2 different states, not 6 or 7. The white community says, "Did you get blocked?" No, you didn't. I don't block people unless sometimes people get spam filtered, or they get if like they're using profanity and stuff, you might get auto filtered out. But I from these streams, I only usually block people that are saying like hate terms, or are like spamming or being rude to other people in the chat. Yes, Vaudrey was noting the CERB covers the Vaudrey covers that covers self-employed where EI does not. But again, it only covers self-employed in certain circumstances where they've totally lost their income. If they haven't lost all their income, then they're not covered. Bernie, Invisible Man said Bernie would be a 70s NDP to a certain degree, but I actually think it's more like 70s Bernie would be 70s NDP, and Bernie now is still sort of NDP now. Bernie's less radical than he was in the 70s, and the NDP was less radical than it was in the 70s. Yeah, 57 hippie chick says that I'm a boomer, and this is the second time I've supported and voted for Bernie. I'm surprised myself that there aren't more boomers that support him. Yeah, me too, because I think a lot of boomers understand the value, and older people older than boomers, understand the value of Social Security. They've seen, injustice. They've seen the crises that have faced regular people, and that Bernie has been good. And these people have lived long enough to sort of know that, like, when Bernie says that he was talking about issues before they were important, like, people that are older can say, like, I remember a time where only people like Bernie Sanders were defending workers, where only Bernie Sanders was defending gay people, where only Bernie Sanders was talking about or not only Bernie, but Bernie was one of the few people talking about opposing the Iraq war, or the Iran, or the Iraq war. And like, younger folks, maybe like really young folks, kids that are only like 20, they don't remember all that stuff because like they were only born in like 2000, and like they probably can't remember things, more than say 15 years ago. Whereas older folks can. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know, but it certainly is something I've noted. It's like Joe Biden has said he wanted to cut Social Security. You think older folks would be the most likely to vote for Bernie because he's been such a champion of Social Security. Joseph asks from Montreal or Toronto. I am in Kingston most of the time. So kind of in between the two. Alexander says, I don't want to have to choose between Biden and Trump. Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with you. It's like both of them have been accused of sexual assault. Both of them have been clearly have cognitive issues. Both of them are awful. God, what a bad choice. Like, even with Hillary, and I was not one to defend Hillary, she was better than Biden in a lot of ways. And at least you could say, like, you were voting for the first woman. Biden's got, like, none of that. Which is why, like, we talked about this, there's, like, no enthusiasm for Biden. Lots of people are enthusiastic about Trump. I don't get it, but, like, they are, right? but like almost like a third of voters were enthusiastic about Clinton, but only a quarter about Biden. So as unpopular and as unexciting as Hillary Clinton was, she was better than Biden. Put that in your, like take that as a perspective. Shredder says that Rona Ambrose would be a great new leader for the Conservatives. A lot of people were saying that, Shredder, but it's not going to happen because at least as of right now, I mean, it looks like they're postponing the contest, but the 4 people that are running are locked in. I really do think it's either going to be Peter MacKay or Aaron O'Toole, and likely Peter MacKay. A lot of people wanted Rona Ambrose to run for the Conservatives. I'd never vote for Rona Ambrose or any Conservative, or I wouldn't vote for the Liberal Party either, or I only vote NDP. But the question is then, like, she just didn't want to run. Maybe she feels like she doesn't want to be in politics anymore. Maybe she's enjoying her life in the private sector. But a lot of people really did want her to run, a ton. And I do think that if she did run, she would have had a good chance of winning. Yeah, Vodra is right that Charlie Angus did a lot of really good work trying to hold big tech companies to account, whether it's facial recognition or whether it's the Facebook's role in misinformation and politics. Charlie Angus has been a real leader on that. Charlie's a great MP. He's a fantastic MP. And he's been a champion of Indigenous people. No offense to boomers, but we'll outlive them. Also, 2020s equal 1910s, 1920s plus 1960s, 70s. Yeah, I mean, and again, with like boomers, like it's like they have the right to vote. Obviously, I feel like in aggregate, again, and the boomers that watch my stuff and that watch other progressives, I think they're doing the right thing. They're saying like, look, my kids, my grandkids, like are behind Bernie. They love this man. Like, we should listen to the young people. And I'm voting for my children's future, my grandchildren's future, so they can have a better world. And I feel like Bernie represents that for a lot of people, right? He represents that for a lot of people. In terms of the 1910s, 20s, I mean, potentially, yeah. Potentially, it's hard to say what the 2020s are. Like, is this a blip? I don't know, right? And to be fair to those comparisons is that, like, climate change is obviously something that's been happening for humans for millennia. But, like, we didn't know the extent to which we were causing climate change. And so the effects of mass climate change could manifest very differently than previous crises have. Mark Andreas asks what I think of Lament for a Nation and George Grant's work. Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of it when I was in undergrad. I found the work convincing to a certain degree. Grant was, of course, a kind of conservative, but he sort of adopted certain leftist elements, like the idea of like government intervention, protecting culture through by not just simply kowtowing to the market. Grant's definitely been influential. It's not somebody that I would cite as one of my main influences, but I've certainly read him. Yes, like Nathan Drake, back in the 1980s, Bernie Sanders hated the Contras. I was like, oh, Bernie Sanders hated murderous gangs? Okay, it sounds good to me. Like, you know what I mean? Invisible Man says Christo is an Acadian. Not quite. My mom, like my mom wouldn't identify as an Acadian because she was from northern New Brunswick on the west coast of near the Quebec-Maine border. So she identified as more as Madawaska. So it's not quite Acadian. But I'm like my mom was French Canadian from New Brunswick. Yeah, like, Bernie's got 3 houses. Look, that's more than most people. You could have a reasonable if you wanted to pass a policy that said people shouldn't own more than one house. I mean, look, that would be fine. That's not something Bernie's doing, but I think like the man has a level of wealth that is more than most people could ever have. It's true, but also it is a level of wealth that if the richest people in society were as rich as Bernie is and got rich in the way Bernie did, we wouldn't have nearly the same amount of problems as we do now. And that's not to say that because I still think that like an ideal society wouldn't even have people with Bernie's level of wealth, frankly. But it's Bernie Sanders is the first person to say that he deserves to pay more taxes. And I think that's what's important. What's after Trump? Also collab with Vaush, maybe. I don't know Vaush at all. I've heard some about him. All I know is that some of the people I know like him a lot and some of them don't. I haven't really engaged with his content all that much. So, I mean, I don't even know. I don't think I follow him on social media. He doesn't follow me. So, I mean, I think there's a lot more people that he would want to collab with because he knows them better, and I would want to collab with because I know them better on the list. But of course, I would never say just no because I don't know him well enough to give a definitive answer. And what's after Trump? I mean, I don't know. It depends what happens. Does Trump win both elections? Does Trump lose, but it's very close? Does Trump get walloped? I don't know. On the one hand, you might say that if Trump gets absolutely walloped, which could happen, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen with Biden, but, I could be wrong. Biden could win. And if, like, say, Bernie or Biden beats Trump really badly, then maybe the Republicans will try to pivot away from the Trumpian era. If Trump wins, obviously, then it's going to encourage his form of politics. If he loses, but it's close, then maybe the argument will be that, Donald Trump's ideas were good. It's just that Trump himself was too divisive. You need somebody with Trump's ideas, but that is is less abrasive. Maybe that's what you need. I'm not sure. I could see the Republican Party eventually maybe trying the more racially inclusive approach. Like the argument for the conservatives in the United States was after 2012, when they lost in 2012, Republicans were like, what do we need to do to succeed? And they actually came to Canada and they looked at Stephen Harper, who was the conservative prime minister at the time, and he had just won in 2011 a majority government. He won over half the seats and he got about 40% of the vote. And the argument was that Stephen Harper, yes, the conservative movement in Canada had a lot of rural old white voters, but they were able to win the seats needed to win a big victory from minority populations like Chinese Canadians, a lot of South Asian Canadians. They voted for the conservatives. And it was an example that the Republicans said about how we can reach non-white communities with a more inclusive conservatism, right? At least on racial issues. Some of these voters are still very socially conservative. They want you to be tough on crime. They might not be LGBTQ friendly. They might be anti-abortion, what have you. But they don't like the Republicans because even if they believe they agree with the Republicans on those social issues, they just feel the Republicans are not welcoming to non-white people. And so, I think that's true. And so that was the approach. But then Donald Trump came along, did none of that, and then won anyway. So I don't know what'll happen. I don't know. Because the argument, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the long-term argument is that the Republican Party is facing a looming demographic crisis, and unless they can find a way to start winning minorities, not winning them even, but winning more minority votes, it'll become harder and harder for them to win elections. Convert Chronicle says, does the real estate market need more regulations in Canada, Ontario? I would say so. I'm not an expert on all regions, but I would say so. Whether it's curtailing Airbnb, things like that, I would say we need more regulations. Yeah, especially in certain big cities. And then again, some other people say we need more regulations, but regulations which specifically allow for more density. And there's always a debate about that, even amongst progressives. Like, should we allow for more building of non-traditional housing in single detached neighborhoods, which will increase housing stock, but would anger a lot of the people that live in those neighborhoods, which can include sometimes some fairly well-off upper middle class progressives. So you got like NIMBYism there too. So guys, I know we've got a ton of questions tonight. Yeah, Joseph Willis says, boomers, for me, like me, I'm from Bernie. We had to live through 30 years of MSMs. You guys have YouTube. You're right. I mean, that's one thing we have. We do have alternative media. We're still small fries. Even Cal Kalinske, one of the big dogs, he's got, 800,000 subs now? He's still small fry compared to, like, the big MSMs. But, like, you know, we're trying our best. And it does give people an alternative source. You're right. That is a good point. That's a very good point. And like, again, a lot of like more and more older folks are getting independent media on the internet, but on average, older folks are more loyal to like the Foxes, the MSNBCs, the CNNs, the ABCs, what have you. The Invisible Man said the 1% wants Trump in the White House for the next 4 years. This is why they're giving you Joe Biden. I think probably Trump would be a little bit more friendly to the rich than Biden. But I think the main point is that if they get Biden into the contest, then they win either way. Because the 1% might not want Biden as much as they want Trump, but they would not be unhappy with Joe Biden. Joe Biden, for them, would be perfectly acceptable because he's very much a status quo politician, and they wouldn't mind that. Remember, Biden went to rich people and said, nothing will fundamentally change, and that was music to their ear. So, guys, I know there was a lot of questions I didn't have time to get to. I did my best to get it through as many as we could. Everyone was very generous tonight with your great questions and comments and with your support for the channel. But it is about 10:42, and with my son home all the time now, I don't have to drop him off at daycare. But it's a long day of childcare that Brianna and I have to piece together, but in between doing work. So I'm gonna try to get some sleep. Just as a reminder for new folks to the channel, if you are new to this stream and this is the first time you've seen me, be sure to click that subscribe button. I know most of you are likely subscribers. If you are, I encourage you to click that little bell next to the subscribe button, because that should mean that you get every one of my videos. Or at least if I post 3 a day. If I post more, they don't send notifications out. But when I post a video, if you click that bell, you'll get a notification. And you'll be able to see the content first, and that also helps the channel because YouTube loves those immediate views because it signals to them that this is a video people are excited to see. I do these videos every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. These live streams. Sometimes I do bonus live streams. I'll give you some notice as much as I can, but unless there's another debate, I usually do them for debates. I don't know the next one I'll do. Maybe after some voting or something. But I do these every Wednesday night. If you want to support the channel, one of the best ways you can do that is to just, watch my content and share it. When you watch the videos, YouTube takes that data in and says that this video is good. So if you guys watch all my videos or the ones you're interested in, that helps the channel. And if you wish, you can also support me on Patreon. There should be a link in the description. And if you just Google Christo Aivalis Patreon, you should see that as well. So guys, this was really great. Again, we'll be doing this next Wednesday. If there were some real good questions that I didn't have time to get to, again, I apologize. If they're not super timely, maybe save them for next week. Hopefully we can get to them then. Brianna is, of course, not with us right now. She's upstairs. But I know that she would want to wish you guys a great week. And stay safe as much as you can. I know not everyone can. If you work an essential job or you have to choose between you paying your rent and stuff. But as much as you can, stay home, stay safe. I'll see you guys soon with another video, and I'll see you next week for a super chat or for a live stream. Okay. Okay, guys, have a good one. Thanks again.